The air tasted of ozone and ash, a metallic tang that clung to the back of Leon's throat. He stood on what had once been the crystalline bridge between the seventh heaven and the ninth inferno, now a featureless plane of shimmering, neutral energy. The war was over. The Holy Demon War, a conflict that had raged for millennia, painting the cosmos in strokes of divine light and hellfire, was finally, irrevocably, finished. He had finished it. Around him, the merged realm pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of a newborn world. Where golden spires had scraped the firmament and obsidian fortresses had plunged into abyssal depths, there was now only a gentle, pearlescent glow. The screams of angels and the roars of demons had faded into a profound, unsettling silence. Leon's hands, still humming with residual power, hung limp at his sides. His ceremonial robes, once a tapestry of cosmic symbols representing his title as the Synthesis Sage, were torn and stained with energies no mortal eye could comprehend. He felt old. Not in years, his divine essence made such measures meaningless, but in weight. The weight of every life extinguished, every realm shattered and remade, every desperate plea for mercy or victory he had synthesized into this sterile piece pressed down on his shoulders. He had not meant for this. Not the totality of it. His ultimate synthesis authority was a tool for creation, for solving problems. He had sought to merge ceasefire with armistice to craft a temporary peace. But the exponential nature of his power had taken his intent and magnified it beyond recognition. The two concepts had fused, then fed upon the very fabric of the conflicting realms, drawing in heaven and hell themselves. The result was this, a blank slate, a neutral zone where neither divine grace nor infernal corruption held sway. It was peace, yes. A perfect, absolute, and terribly empty peace. A figure materialized from the glowing mist, Serial, an archangel of the final choir, her wings now dulled to a soft gray. The stabilization holds, Synthesis Sage, she reported, her voice devoid of its former celestial music. The merged energy is self-sustaining. The war is concluded. Another form coalesced, Graz ZT, a demon lord of the deeper pits, his horns now rounded, his fiery aura reduced to embers. My legions are placid. They remember the fury, but the drive for it is synthesized away. What have you wrought, mortal turned god? Leon did not look at them. He stared at his own hands, at the faint, intricate patterns of light that danced under his skin, the visual echo of his authority. I wrought an end, he said, his voice rough from disuse. That was the request. That was the need. And what of you? Serial asked. The architect of this new reality. Will you rule it? A bitter laugh, dry and hollow, escaped Leon's lips. Rule. The thought was ash in his mouth. He had spent eons in libraries of light and labyrinths of shadow, merging concepts, weapons, armies, and ideologies. He had synthesized strategies from 1,000 battlefields, emotions from 1,000,000 hearts, to reach this point. He was tired. A deep, soul-crushing fatigue that no amount of divine energy could soothe. He didn't want a throne of neutral energy. He didn't want gratitude or fear or worship. He wanted quiet. He wanted the simple, tangible weight of a sun-warmed stone. He wanted to feel rain on his face without analyzing its magical composition. He wanted to forget the smell of ozone and ash. No, Leon said, the word final. My work is done. He turned from the lingering representatives of the old order. He walked away from the heart of the merged realm, each step taking him toward its fuzzy, undefined edges. The pulsating light of the neutral zone gave way to the familiar star-strewn black of the mundane cosmos. He found a small, rocky asteroid drifting in the void and sat upon it, legs drawn up, looking back at the glowing patchwork of his greatest and most terrible creation. Here, alone, he reached inward. His ultimate synthesis authority responded, not as a roaring inferno of power, but as a well-worn, familiar tool. He contemplated the two concepts he needed. Not for a realm, not for a war, but for himself. Seclusion, the essence of isolation, of being apart. The quiet of a deep forest, the stillness of a forgotten valley, the unbroken horizon of a distant shore. He gathered the feeling, the abstract notion, from the depths of his own longing. Forgetfulness, not the erasure of memory, but the gentle blurring of edges, the softening of sharp details. The way a childhood home fades in the mind, the way the pain of an old wound dulls with time. The blessing of being unimportant, of being overlooked. He held the two concepts in his mind's eye. With a focus born of infinite practice, yet trembling with a new, personal vulnerability, he willed them together. Ultimate synthesis authority, activated. There was no grand spectacle, no shockwave of power. Instead, a deep, resonant chime sounded within Leon's very core, a sound felt rather than heard. He watched as the silvery thread of seclusion and the soft, gray mist of forgetfulness intertwined, spiraling around each other. They didn't just combine, they multiplied. The isolation became absolute, impenetrable. The forgetting became an active force, a gentle tide that would wash over any record, any memory, any divine scrying attempt that sought the legend of the synthesis sage. It would make his past a rumor, his presence a shadow, his very existence a question mark to the cosmos. The cost was immediate and profound. A searing pain, white-hot and clean, lanced through him. It was not a wound, but a severing. A vast portion of his divine essence, the accumulated power of ages, the might that had let him merge realms, was consumed as fuel for this final, personal synthesis. He felt it drain away, like a great river pouring into a bottomless well. The light under his skin dimmed. The cosmic weight of his presence lightened. He was still powerful, still the bearer of the authority, but he was, less. Mortal adjacent. A being who could be overlooked by the heavens and hells he had just rearranged. When the process finished, Leon slumped forward, gasping. Sweat beaded on his brow, a startlingly mortal sensation. He felt lighter, emptier, but also unshackled. A faint, shimmering aura, visible only to his enhanced senses, now clung to him, the synthesized field of secluded forgetfulness. It was his retirement package. He spent what felt like days on that asteroid, recovering his strength, letting the new, lesser equilibrium of his being settle. He used a sliver of his remaining power to synthesize simple traveler's clothes, sturdy trousers, a linen shirt, a worn leather coat, from the concepts of journey and durability. His grand robes he left behind on the rock, a discarded skin. Then, he began to walk. Not through the void, but between it. His authority allowed him to merge here with there, taking small, unseen steps across the fabric of reality. He sought a place untouched by the war, far from the centers of divine or infernal power. A backwater. A frontier. He found it on the continent of Ethelgard, in a region known as the Dustspan Marches. Maps labeled it as magically barren, a place where ley lines withered and died, where spells sputtered and failed. To the great powers, it was a worthless, silent tract of land. To Leon, it was perfect. His final step brought him to the edge of a neglected field just as the twin moons of this world began to rise, casting long, pale shadows. Before him stood a farmhouse. Or the skeleton of one. The roof had caved in on one side. The wooden walls were gray and warped by time and the harsh, dry wind that swept across the marches. A rusted pump stood sentinel over a dry well. Fences lay in rotten heaps. The soil, as he knelt to touch it, was pale, gritty, and utterly devoid of the magical hum that permeated richer lands. It was dead dirt in the mystical sense. Perfect for not drawing attention. A smile, genuine and weary, touched Leon's lips for the first time in centuries. Here. This broken, silent place. He could build a simple life. He could till this soil, plant seeds, coax life from it without cosmic stakes. He could brew tea and watch the sun set. The quiet was immense, a physical presence after the eternal din of war. He walked toward the derelict farmhouse, his boots crunching on the parched earth. As he placed a hand on the splintered doorframe, a sudden, unexpected sensation prickled at the edges of his awareness. A faint tremor, not through the ground, but through the residual synthesis energy still humming softly within him. He paused, frowning. His senses, though diminished, were still keen. The soil was magic barren, yes. But beneath it, something else slept. Something old, and vast, and utterly dormant. It wasn't demonic or divine. It was primordial, a weight of existence that predated such concepts. It didn't threaten, it simply was, buried deep beneath the dust and silence of his chosen retreat. His new, quiet farm life, it seemed, was built atop a slumbering mystery. The first rays of dawn painted the dust-span marches in hues of pale gold and dusty orange, creeping over the horizon like hesitant visitors to a forgotten land. Leon stirred from his makeshift bed of old straw and a threadbare blanket in the corner of the dilapidated farmhouse, his body stiff from the night's chill. For a moment, he lay still, listening to the absolute silence that blanketed this remote frontier, a silence so profound it seemed to absorb even the memory of sound. No distant trumpets of celestial armies, no rumble of infernal engines, no whispered prayers or curses that had filled his existence for centuries. Just the gentle rasp of his own breathing and the faint creak of weathered wood settling in the morning cool. He rose slowly, his movements deliberate and measured, as if testing the reality of this new existence. The floorboards groaned beneath his bare feet, protesting the unfamiliar weight. Through the cracked windowpane, he surveyed his domain, a patch of hard-baked earth stretching perhaps half an acre, bordered by crumbling stone walls and beyond them, the endless, rolling expanse of the marches. The soil looked inert, lifeless, a grayish-brown crust that seemed to repel rather than invite growth. Yet beneath that surface, Leon could still sense it, that ancient, slumbering power he detected upon arrival, a deep, resonant hum like a heartbeat slowed to geological time. He pushed the thought aside. Today was for beginnings, not mysteries. Dressing in simple linen trousers and a worn tunic he'd brought with him, clothes deliberately chosen for their lack of grandeur, Leon stepped outside. The morning air was crisp and dry, carrying the scent of dust and distant sage. He walked the perimeter of his plot, his boots crunching on the parched ground. His eyes, once capable of perceiving the weave of cosmic forces, now focused on mundane details, the way sunlight caught the dew on a stubborn weed, the pattern of cracks in the earth, the rusted metal bucket lying on its side near the well. This simplicity felt like a balm, a deliberate narrowing of focus that soothed the lingering echoes of divine conflict in his mind. Near the eastern wall, half buried in the dirt, he found it, a rusty hoe, its wooden handle splintered and bleached by sun, its metal blade pitted with corrosion. He lifted it, feeling its weight, a solid, earthly heft that grounded him. This would be his first tool. But as he dragged the hoe across the soil, it merely scraped the surface, leaving a shallow white line. The earth here was stubborn, compacted by years of neglect and the magic barren nature of the marches. A flicker of frustration crossed Leon's face, quickly suppressed. He had promised himself a simple life, but simple did not mean futile. His gaze swept the area, falling on a peculiar object near the base of the wall. At first glance, it looked like a large, curved stone, blackened and smooth. But as he approached, he recognized the shape, a dragon's claw, severed cleanly at the joint, its scales dulled by time but still bearing faint traces of iridescent sheen. It was larger than his forearm, the talons as long as his fingers, curved and wicked even in death. Leon knelt, brushing dirt from its surface. How had it come to be here, in this remote, magic barren place? Perhaps a relic from some ancient skirmish, forgotten when the land lost its vitality. The Dragonkin had been among the factions in the Holy Demon War, their power immense but ultimately swept aside in the final synthesis. He felt a pang of something, not guilt, exactly, but a weary acknowledgement of all that had been lost or transformed in his wake. He carried both the hoe and the claw to a clear spot in the center of the plot. Setting them side by side on the ground, he took a deep breath, centering himself. This would be his first use of the ultimate synthesis authority, since his retirement, and he intended it to be modest, practical. No grand mergers of realms or concepts, just a tool for tilling soil. He placed a hand on the hoe's handle, the other on the cool, smooth surface of the dragon's claw. Closing his eyes, he reached inward, to the core of his being where his power resided. It felt diminished now, a once roaring river reduced to a steady stream, but its nature remained unchanged, the ability to perceive the fundamental essences of things and weave them together into something greater. He focused on the hoe, its essence was simple, iron, wood, the concept of cultivation, the memory of countless hands that had wielded it. The dragon's claw was more complex, scales of legendary toughness, the inherent strength of draconic muscle and bone, the residual echo of dominance and primal force. Leon began the synthesis, not as the grand architect he once was, but as a craftsman with a specific need. He guided the energies, merging not just the physical materials but their intrinsic qualities. The rusty iron of the hoe blade flowed like liquid mercury, wrapping around the claw, while the wood of the handle seemed to grow and fuse with the bone within. The process was silent but intense, a vibration that hummed through Leon's hands and up his arms. He felt a drain on his reserves, a slight fatigue that made his breath catch, a reminder that his power was no longer infinite, that even this small act had cost. When he opened his eyes, the new tool lay before him. The hoe was transformed, the blade was now a single, curved piece of dark, gleaming metal shaped like a dragon's talon, seamlessly attached to a handle of polished, deep brown wood that felt warm to the touch, as if still alive. It radiated a subtle aura of effortless power. Leon lifted it, surprised by its perfect balance. He swung it experimentally at the hard ground. The talon blade sank into the earth with a soft hiss, parting the soil as if it were soft butter, turning over rich, dark loam that smelled unexpectedly fertile. He worked in a rhythm, each stroke smooth and requiring minimal effort. The tools seemed to anticipate his movements, the dragon's inherent dominance over earth making the soil yield willingly. Within an hour, the entire plot was tilled, rows neat and deep, the transformed earth already looking more alive. Leon leaned on the hoe, breathing slightly heavily from the exertion and the residual fatigue from the synthesis. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. This was progress. This was simplicity. From a leather pack inside the farmhouse, he retrieved a handful of seeds, common potato seeds he'd purchased from a trader in a distant village, chosen for their hardiness. Or so he'd thought. As he sowed them in the freshly turned soil, patting the earth gently over each, he noticed something odd about the seeds. They were slightly warmer than they should be, and when he held one up to the light, he thought he saw a faint, almost imperceptible glow deep within its brown shell. He dismissed it as a trick of the morning sun. Perhaps they were a variety adapted to harsh climates. He finished planting as the sun climbed higher, the heat of the day beginning to build. The rest of the day passed in quiet labor. He repaired a section of the stone wall, fetched water from the well, its bucket requiring a new rope he fashioned from old vines, and began clearing debris from the farmhouse interior. His movements were methodical, his mind largely quiet, focused on the physicality of the tasks. Only occasionally would his thoughts drift, to the silence, so different from the constant psychic clamor of the divine realms, to the satisfying ache in his muscles, a sensation he'd almost forgotten, to the lingering question of what slept beneath this land. But he pushed such musings aside. Today was for grounding himself in this new reality. As dusk approached, painting the sky in shades of violet and deep blue, Leon stood at the edge of his field, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He was about to turn toward the farmhouse for a simple meal when a soft, ethereal light caught his eye. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. There, in the neat rows of turned earth, tiny sprouts had emerged. They were no more than an inch tall, delicate stems topped with pairs of nascent leaves. But they glowed. A faint, pulsating luminescence emanated from them, hues of soft orange and gold that seemed to flicker like captured embers. The light was gentle, not blinding, but unmistakable against the deepening twilight. It cast subtle, dancing shadows on the dark soil around each sprout. Leon knelt slowly, his heart pounding with a sudden, cold realization. He reached out, his fingers hovering just above one of the glowing sprouts. He could feel a gentle warmth radiating from it, and a familiar, subtle energy signature, one he hadn't encountered since the final battles of the war. Phoenix embers. Remnants of the celestial phoenix legions, beings of pure fire and rebirth, whose essence could ignite life or reduce continents to ash. During the chaotic climax of the Holy Demon War, in the midst of a desperate synthesis to stabilize a collapsing frontline, he must have had these seeds in his possession. A stray spark, a moment of uncontrolled energy overflow, the ultimate synthesis authority, acting on instinct. He had merged the common potato seeds with phoenix embers. He stared at the softly glowing field, the peaceful dusk now feeling charged with latent, elemental power. These were no ordinary crops. They were seeds accidentally infused with the essence of rebirth and divine fire. What would they grow into? And what would their presence, however small now, attract to this quiet, magic-barren frontier he had chosen for its obscurity? The simplicity of his morning resolve felt suddenly fragile, balanced on the edge of a revelation he had not intended to sow. The morning sun cast a pale, dusty light over the dust-span marches, painting Leon's small farm in hues of ochre and gray. He stood before his newly repaired farmhouse, hands on his hips, surveying the quiet expanse of land that stretched to the horizon. The soil, though still hard and magic-barren, showed faint signs of life where his dragon-claw hoe had carved neat rows. In the center of the garden, the phoenix ember potato sprouts glowed with a soft, persistent light, their orange and gold hues shimmering like captured embers in the dawn. Leon frowned, his mind drifting back to the chaos of the Holy Demon War, how those seeds must have been contaminated during the final merger, a careless oversight in his rush to escape. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. Today was about practicality, not past regrets. His supplies were running low. The farmhouse, while sturdy now after his repairs, lacked basic comforts, no proper cookware, only a few worn blankets, and his coin purse was nearly empty. Leon had always been a man of action, even in retirement. If he wanted to maintain this peaceful life, he needed to earn some coin, and quickly. An idea formed in his mind, simple, unobtrusive. He would set up a roadside stall, offering herbs and teas from his garden. The dust-span marches saw little traffic, but the occasional traveler might pass by, seeking respite on the lonely frontier road that wound past his property. It was a humble plan, one that wouldn't draw attention, or so he hoped. Leon spent the morning gathering materials. From the nearby woods, he collected sturdy branches and woven reeds, using his ultimate synthesis authority, with a light touch. He merged a piece of weathered wood with a fragment of stability he drew from the earth beneath his feet, creating a solid table that wouldn't wobble in the wind. It was a minor synthesis, barely draining him, but it left a faint tinge of exhaustion in his bones, a reminder of how much his power had diminished since merging seclusion and forgetfulness. Next, he foraged in his garden, plucking common herbs, thyme, sage, and a few wild mint leaves that had taken root near the farmhouse walls. They were ordinary plants, untouched by synthesis, but they carried the subtle vitality of the land he was nurturing. By midday, the stall was ready. Leon placed it at the edge of his property, where the farm met the dusty road. He crafted a simple sign from a scrap of wood, carving the words "Simple Herbs and Teas" with a careful hand. The letters were rough but legible, a testament to his desire for anonymity. He arranged the herbs in small clay pots he'd found in the farmhouse cellar, and set out a kettle and a few crude cups. The air was still, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant pine. Leon leaned against the stall, his eyes scanning the horizon. The road was empty, stretching into the distance like a faded ribbon. For a long while, there was only the whisper of the wind and the occasional chirp of a hardy desert bird. Then, a sound broke the silence, the distant thud of hooves, growing louder. Leon straightened, his senses sharpening. He saw a figure on horseback approaching from the west, moving at a frantic pace. As it drew nearer, details emerged, a woman in battered armor, her cloak torn and stained with dark patches. She rode a massive, scaled beast, a dragon, though its wings were folded tightly, and it lumbered with obvious fatigue. Leon's heart sank. This was no ordinary traveler. The armor marked her as a dragon knight, and the wounds she bore spoke of recent violence. He considered retreating into his farmhouse, but it was too late. The dragon stumbled, its great body shuddering, and the rider was thrown from its back, collapsing in a heap just a few yards from his stall. Leon rushed forward, his farmer's instincts overriding his caution. The woman, Elara, as he would later learn, lay motionless, her breathing shallow. Blood seeped from a deep gash in her side, and her face was pale, almost gray. Her dragon, a creature of shimmering bronze scales, let out a low, pained groan before settling beside her, its eyes glazed. Leon knelt, his hands hovering over her. He was no healer, not in the traditional sense, but his ultimate synthesis authority hummed in his mind, offering possibilities. He couldn't use anything overt, no divine artifacts or flashy miracles. That would risk exposure. But he could work with what he had, the common herbs from his stall, and a trace of something more. He hurried back to the stall, grabbing a handful of thyme and mint. In his garden, he spotted a patch of wild rosemary, its scent sharp and cleansing. Returning to Elara, he placed the herbs in a small pot he kept for brewing. Then, he closed his eyes, focusing inward. His own resilience, the lingering strength from his days as the synthesis master, was a resource he rarely tapped, it was tied too closely to his identity. But this was a life at stake. Gently, he drew upon a sliver of that resilience, synthesizing it with the concept of vitality. It wasn't a grand merge, it was subtle, almost invisible, like infusing the air with a whisper of energy. He channeled this synthesized vitality into the herbs, feeling a slight drain as his body grew weary. The herbs shimmered for a moment, their colors deepening, before settling back into their ordinary appearance. Leon boiled water over a small fire he kindled with flint and tinder, then steeped the herbs. The brew that resulted was a simple, aromatic soup, its steam carrying a warmth that seemed to pulse with latent energy. He lifted Elara's head, careful not to jostle her wounds, and trickled the soup between her lips. At first, nothing happened. Then, a faint glow spread from her core, visible only as a soft light beneath her skin. Her breathing steadied, the pallor receding from her cheeks. The gash on her side knitted together, leaving only a faint scar. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises of startling blue, clear and alert. Elara sat up slowly, her hand going to her side in wonder. What was that?" she whispered, her voice hoarse but strong. She looked at Leon, then at the empty cup in his hand. "I felt like I was fading, and then, warmth. Life." Leon offered a modest smile, masking the fatigue that tugged at him. "Just a simple herbal remedy," he said, his tone casual. "The herbs here have a bit of kick to them. You must have been through quite an ordeal." Elara nodded, rising to her feet with ease. She glanced at her dragon, which was now stirring, its wound similarly healed. I was ambushed by bandits in the northern passes, she explained, her gaze sharpening as she took in Leon's humble stall and farm. They sought my dragon's scales, valuable on the black market. I fought them off, but not without cost. I've never seen herbs work so quickly. She paused, studying Leon with a mix of gratitude and curiosity. You have a gift, farmer. This place, it feels different. Calm, yet alive. Leon shrugged, turning to tidy his stall. It's just a quiet farm. I'm glad I could help. You should be on your way, those bandits might still be lurking. Elara mounted her dragon, which now stood tall, its strength restored. Thank you, she said, her voice earnest. If you ever need aid, seek out the Dragon Knights of the Silver Peaks. I am Elara. I won't forget this. With a final nod, she urged her dragon forward, and they thundered down the road, disappearing into the dust cloud they kicked up. Leon watched them go, a sense of unease settling in his gut. The healing had been too potent, too fast. Rumors would spread, he knew how these things worked. He busied himself with packing up the stall, his movements deliberate, as if by focusing on the mundane he could ward off the impending attention. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. As he lifted a clay pot, his eyes caught movement at the tree lean where the road curved into a thicket of gnarled pines. A group of figures lurked there, half hidden by the foliage. They were rough-looking men, clad in leather and worn furs, their faces grim. Bandits. Their eyes weren't on the retreating Dragon Knight, they were fixed intently on Leon's stall, and on him. One of them pointed, whispering to another, and a cold smile spread across his scarred face. Leon's hand tightened on the pot. The peace of his farm life had just been breached, and the first ripple of chaos was already lapping at his doorstep. The sun had long since dipped below the jagged horizon of the dust-span marches, painting the sky in deep purples and indigos that bled into the encroaching darkness. Leon sat on the rough-hewn bench outside his farmhouse, sipping a cup of herbal tea that held no special properties, just chamomile and mint he'd gathered from the wild patches near the creek. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of turned earth from his day's labor and the distant, mineral tang of the barren hills. His thoughts drifted to the Dragon Knight, Elara. Her sudden appearance and equally sudden departure had left an odd quiet in their wake. The bandits he'd spotted watching from the tree lean after she'd ridden off hadn't shown themselves since, but Leon's senses, though diminished from his final synthesis, still hummed with a residual awareness. He could feel their presence like a faint itch at the edge of his perception, a cluster of low-grade malice lurking just beyond the tree line where the forest met his cleared land. He finished his tea and stood, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. The farmhouse behind him was a shadowy silhouette against the star-dusted sky, its repaired walls holding the night at bay. Inside, the elemental potato sprouts glowed softly in their corner, a warm orange-gold light that pulsed gently with latent phoenix energy. Leon had covered them with a thick cloth to mute their radiance, but even through the fabric, they cast a faint, eerie glow that made the interior of the house look like a smithy's forge at rest. As he turned to go inside, a rustle from the forest edge froze him in place. Not the wind, there was none. Not an animal, the sound was too deliberate, too clustered. Footsteps, cautious but numerous, crunching on dry leaves and brittle twigs. Leon sighed, a weary exhalation that fogged briefly in the chill air. So they'd come after all. He'd hoped his unassuming stall and simple demeanor would discourage them, but the healing of Elara had clearly marked him as a target. He walked to the roadside stall, a simple wooden structure with a slanted roof and a countertop where he'd laid out bundles of common herbs and a few clay pots of tea blends. In the moonlight, it looked utterly mundane, a pitiful little enterprise in the middle of nowhere. 5 figures emerged from the tree lean, silhouettes against the darker black of the forest. They moved with the hunched, predatory gait of men used to taking what they wanted. Leon counted them as they approached, 5 bandits, dressed in mismatched leather and fur, weapons glinting dully in the starlight, 2 short swords, a hatchet, a cudgel, and a bow held loosely in one man's hand. The leader, a burly man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, stepped forward. His voice was a gravelly rumble. "Evening, farmer. We saw what you did for that night. Nice bit of magic you've got there." Leon kept his expression neutral, his hands at his sides. "I have no magic. Just herbs and knowledge." "Don't play dumb," the leader sneered. "We watched her ride off good as new. That soup of yours is worth something. All your wares, too. Hand 'em over, and we'll leave you be." Leon felt a familiar weariness settle in his bones. This was exactly what he tried to avoid: attention, demands, the slow erosion of his hard-won solitude. He raised a hand, not in threat but in dismissal, waving them away as one might shoo stray dogs from a garden. "Leave. There's nothing here for you." The bandits exchanged glances, then laughed, a harsh, barking sound that cut through the quiet night. The leader's expression hardened. "Wrong answer, old man." He nodded to the archer, who nocked an arrow and drew the bowstring taut, aiming at Leon's chest. Leon's mind raced. He could feel the faint thrum of his ultimate synthesis authority within him, a well of power that was no longer bottomless but still deep. Using it drained him, each synthesis costing a piece of the divine essence he'd sacrificed for anonymity. But he had no weapons, no combat skills beyond what he'd learned in a war he'd ended by merging realms, not by swordplay. The bandits were closing in, spreading out to flank him. His eyes flicked to the side of his stall, where he'd propped up a crude scarecrow earlier in the day. It was a simple thing, sticks and straw stuffed into old burlap, with a roughly painted face to frighten crows. Next to it, half buried in the dirt, was a small, dull gray stone he'd found while tilling. It was a golem core, a leftover from the Holy Demon War, inert and powerless in this magic barren land, but still holding the latent concept of animation and guardianship. He'd kept it as a curiosity, a relic of a past he was trying to forget. The leader took another step forward, his sword pointing at Leon. "Last chance. The wares. Now." Leon made his decision. He couldn't fight them directly, not without revealing power that would bring more than bandits to his door. But he could create a deterrent, something to scare them off without exposing his true nature. He focused his will, reaching inward to the core of his synthesis authority. The sensation was like dipping his hands into a cold, deep stream, a pull, a drain, a transfer of essence. He merged the scarecrow with the golem core. The process was instantaneous but vivid in his mind's eye. He saw the concepts intertwine, the simple purpose of frightening pests from the scarecrow merging with the latent animated guardian essence of the golem core. The synthesis authority took these two entities and forged them into something exponentially superior, not just a moving scarecrow, but a sentient, territorial protector born from farmyard simplicity and ancient magic. In the physical world, the scarecrow shuddered. Straw rustled, sticks creaked. The painted eyes seemed to gleam with a sudden, ruddy light, like embers stirred to life. The bandits froze, their laughter dying in their throats. The scarecrow golem straightened, pulling itself free from the post it had been tied to. It stood 7 feet tall, its burlap skin now seeming tougher, more like leather, its stick limbs moving with a jerky, purposeful grace. It turned its head toward the bandits, the painted mouth twisting into a silent snarl. "What in the hells?" the leader began, but his words were cut off as the golem scarecrow took a step forward, the ground trembling faintly under its weight. Leon felt the drain immediately, a moderate but significant pull on his synthesis energy. It was like a wave of fatigue washing over him, leaving him lightheaded and needing to steady himself against the stall counter. He'd used more than he'd intended, the golem core had been more potent than he'd realized, or perhaps his own diminished state made the cost higher. He pushed through it, focusing on the bandits. The archer loosed his arrow. It struck the golem scarecrow's chest with a thud, embedding itself in the burlap, and did nothing. The creature didn't even flinch. Instead, it raised one stick arm, and the end sharpened into a point like a crude spear, gleaming in the starlight. That was enough for the bandits. The leader cursed, backing away. "Sorcery," he spat, then turned and ran, his men scrambling after him. The golem scarecrow took 2 more steps toward the tree lean, as if to pursue, then stopped at the edge of the cleared land, standing sentinel, its ember eyes watching the forest. Leon sank onto the bench, breathing heavily. The fatigue was deep, settling into his muscles like lead. He'd need rest, proper rest, to recover even this moderate expenditure. He looked at the golem scarecrow, now still and silent, a guardian born from a moment of necessity. It had worked, too well, perhaps. It wasn't just a scarecrow, it was a being with a will of its own, born of synthesis. He spent the next hour in a weary daze, checking the perimeter, ensuring the bandits were truly gone. Their tracks led deep into the forest, scattered and hurried. The golem scarecrow remained at its post, unmoving. Leon finally retreated to the farmhouse, collapsing onto his cot without even bothering to remove his boots. The glow of the elemental sprouts was a comforting presence in the dark, and he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep almost instantly. Dawn came softly, gray light seeping through the cracks in the shutters. Leon woke feeling better, though not fully recovered. The drain from the synthesis still lingered as a faint ache behind his eyes, a reminder that his power was not limitless. He rose, splashed water on his face from the basin, and stepped outside to greet the day. The golem scarecrow was gone. Not destroyed, not collapsed, gone from its post at the forest edge. Leon's heart skipped a beat. He scanned the clearing, then saw the tracks, deep, deliberate impressions in the soil, leading away from the farm and into the forest. He followed them, his mind racing with possibilities. Had it wandered off? Had the synthesis made it too autonomous? The tracks led him a quarter-mile into the woods, to a small, previously untouched glade. And there, Leon stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The golem scarecrow was working. It moved with that same jerky grace, its stick arms now shaped into crude but effective tools. One arm ended in a broad, flat surface like a plow blade, the other was a series of sharp points like a rake. It was tilling the soil of the glade, turning over the earth with methodical, relentless motions. Already, a patch of land twice the size of Leon's current garden had been cleared and broken, the soil churned into neat, dark rows. But that wasn't what made Leon's blood run cold. Standing at the edge of the glade, partially hidden by the trunk of an ancient oak, was another figure. A man, tall and lean, dressed in robes of earthy browns and greens that seemed to blend with the forest around him. His hair was long and streaked with gray, tied back with a simple cord of woven vines. In his hand, he held a staff of gnarled wood, and his eyes, sharp, intelligent, and glowing faintly with a soft green light, were fixed on the golem scarecrow with an expression of profound curiosity and alarm. Leon recognized the type immediately, a druid. This was no bandit, this was someone attuned to the natural world, someone who would sense the unnatural synthesis energy radiating from the golem scarecrow, someone who would investigate anomalies in the ecosystem. The man hadn't noticed Leon yet, his attention wholly consumed by the animated guardian tilling the forest floor. Leon remained still, hidden in the shadows of the trees. The druid took a step forward, raising his staff slightly, as if to probe the creature with his senses. The golem scarecrow paused in its work, turning its head toward the druid, its ember eyes glowing brighter. A standoff, silent and tense, in the morning-lit glade. And Leon knew, with a sinking certainty, that his quiet farm life had just become infinitely more complicated. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dust-span marches, painting the hard-packed earth in shades of ochre and burnt sienna. Leon stood by his farmhouse, watching the glowing potato sprouts pulse with faint orange light, a constant reminder of his accidental creation. The phoenix ember seeds had grown overnight into knee-high plants, their leaves shimmering with elemental warmth that made the surrounding soil unnaturally fertile. He'd spent the early hours trying to contain their radiance with simple cloth covers, but the light seeped through like sunlight through thin parchment. His thoughts were interrupted by the approach of footsteps, not the heavy tread of bandits, but something lighter, more deliberate. Leon turned to see a man emerging from the tree lean where the golem scarecrow had wandered. The stranger wore robes of woven bark and moss, his hair the color of aged oak, and in his hands he carried a staff carved with runes that seemed to shift in the morning light. Leon recognized the druidic sigils immediately, this was no casual traveler. "Good morning," the druid called, his voice carrying the soft cadence of wind through leaves. "I am Kalen, guardian of these woods. Your construct has been causing quite the stir among the forest spirits." Leon's heart tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. The golem scarecrow stood motionless near the farm's edge now, its straw body animated by the golem core he'd synthesized, wooden hands still clutching imaginary tools. It had returned at dawn, leaving freshly tilled earth in its wake like some dutiful but misunderstood servant. "Just a farm tool," Leon said, wiping his hands on his worn trousers. "Helps with the pests." Kalen's eyes, the color of forest pools, studied the golem scarecrow with unnerving intensity. Tools don't usually till half an acre of untouched glade without instruction. Nor do they carry the echo of creation magic so potent it makes the ancient trees whisper. He stepped closer, his staff tapping the ground. "And then there are the rumors from the trade road. A dragon knight, healed of mortal wounds by soup from a roadside stall." Leon busied himself with checking the potato plants, his mind racing. The synthesis energy, he should have known it would leave traces. Every merge with the ultimate synthesis authority created ripples in reality's fabric, like stones dropped in still water. He'd hoped the magic barren nature of the dust-span marches would dampen those ripples, but apparently not enough to escape a druid's notice. "Good soil, clean herbs," Leon said, keeping his tone casual. The night was tougher than she looked. Kalen moved to the roadside stall, running fingers over the wooden counter. Leon watched as the druid's expression shifted, a slight frown, a narrowing of eyes. Residual energy. The synthesis from merging herbs with vitality for Ilara's soup had left faint impressions in the wood, like heat from a long-extinguished fire. This place. Kalen murmured, more to himself than to Leon. It feels like dawn after a storm. Everything renewed, but with the memory of lightning still in the air. Leon needed to redirect this. Kalen was too perceptive, too attuned to the natural world's whispers. If the druid started asking the right questions in the wrong places. The Holy Kingdom's spies were already sniffing around according to recent traveler gossip. One confirmed report of synthesis magic could bring inquisitors, then paladins, then perhaps even remnants of the old war factions thinking the synthesis sage had returned. Speaking of renewal, Leon said, forcing a smile, I've been having trouble with the watering. The soil here drinks moisture like a desert. He walked to the farmhouse's side where a simple tin watering can rested against the wall. It was ordinary, battered from use, with a few dents from being knocked over by wind. Perfect. Leon picked it up, feeling its weight in his hands. In his mind, he reached for the ultimate synthesis authority, that deep well of power that let him blend essences like an artist mixing paints. For this, he needed something subtle. Not the raw power of a dragon's claw or phoenix embers, but something, alive. He remembered the spring nymphs from the Holy Demon War, minor nature spirits who tended freshwater sources. Their essence was gentle, self-renewing, attuned to growth. He focused, drawing on a memory fragment, the sensation of clear water flowing over mossy stones, the whisper of reeds in a breeze, the cool purity of a mountain spring. The merge began. Leon felt the familiar drain, like blood flowing from a wound, but controlled this time. He channeled the spring nymph essence into the watering can, blending their natures. The tin grew warm in his hands, then cool, as if filled with fresh water. Runes appeared along its surface, not carved, but formed from the metal itself, shifting into patterns of flowing streams and water plants. The can's spout elongated slightly, taking on the graceful curve of a pouring waterfall. When the synthesis completed, Leon's vision swam. A headache bloomed behind his eyes, sharp and insistent, the cost of precision work. He leaned against the farmhouse wall, breathing slowly until the pain receded to a dull throb. Try it, he said to Kalen, handing over the transformed watering can. The druid took it carefully, his expression shifting from curiosity to awe as he felt the object's nature. It's alive. Not sentient, but living. Like a cutting from a willow tree that remembers how to grow. Kalen carried it to the potato plants and tipped it forward. Instead of water pouring out, mist emerged, fine, cool vapor that settled over the leaves like morning dew. The plants seemed to sigh, their glowing leaves brightening momentarily before settling into a contented, steady pulse. The mist continued for exactly 30 seconds, then ceased, leaving the plants perfectly hydrated. It draws moisture from the air, Kalen observed, his earlier suspicion giving way to scholarly fascination. And measures the exact amount needed. This is remarkable craftsmanship. Just a farm tool, Leon repeated, though the words felt hollow even to him. Kalen spent the next hour examining the watering can, then the golem scarecrow, then the potato plants again. He asked careful questions about soil composition, planting techniques, herb sources, all surface inquiries that masked deeper probing. Leon answered each with half-truths and farmer's wisdom, all while maintaining the weary demeanor of a man who just wanted to tend his crops in peace. As the sun climbed toward noon, Kalen finally seemed satisfied, or at least, decided to appear so. Your methods are unorthodox, he said, returning the watering can to Leon. But the results speak for themselves. The forest spirits were agitated by your construct, but they've calmed now. They sense harmony here, however unusual its source. Leon nodded, relief washing through him. I just want quiet. Good crops. Nothing more. Then may your harvest be bountiful, Kalen said with a slight bow. He turned and walked back toward the tree lean, his bark and moss robes blending with the forest edge. Leon watched him go, the headache still pulsing at his temples. He almost missed it, the slight pause Kalen made just before disappearing into the woods. The druid turned his head slightly, not toward Leon, but toward a thick cluster of hawthorn bushes to the west. His lips moved, forming words too soft to carry on the breeze. In the hawthorn shadows, something shifted. A figure dressed in travel-stained but well-made clothes, with the subtle chainmail glint of a holy symbol beneath a cloak. The spy, for that's what he had to be, nodded once to Kalen before melting back into the foliage, moving with trained silence toward the trade road. Leon's hands tightened around the watering can. The metal felt cool, alive, a perfect solution to a simple farm problem. And yet, as he looked at the glowing potatoes, the autonomous golem scarecrow, and now this self-watering system, he understood with cold clarity, every simple solution was another thread in a web slowly drawing attention to his secluded retirement. The Holy Kingdom had sent a spy. And Kalen, for all his druidic wisdom, had just confirmed there was something here worth watching. The morning mist clung to Leon's pumpkin patch like a silver veil, dew-kissed leaves shimmering in the pale dawn light. He knelt between rows of phoenix ember sprouts, their faint orange glow pulsing in rhythm with his breathing, a reminder of past merges that now felt dangerously conspicuous. The headache from yesterday's watering can synthesis had dulled to a persistent throb behind his temples, a warning that his energy reserves weren't infinite. He'd spent the night reviewing his inventory. The self-watering can now hummed softly by the well, drawing moisture from the air in visible tendrils. The golem scarecrow remained in the forest glade, its autonomous tilling having created perfectly symmetrical furrows visible even from the farm's edge. Leon's fingers brushed the soil, feeling its magic barren nature, a quality he'd specifically chosen for his seclusion. Yet now, every synthesis left traces like footprints in snow. He'd just begun examining a pumpkin vine when the sound of hooves shattered the morning stillness. Not the light tread of a single traveler, but the heavy, organized rhythm of a mounted party. Through the thinning mist emerged 5 riders. At their front rode a man in embroidered velvet robes, his silver hair tied back with a sapphire clasp. Lord Alden's bearing spoke of nobility worn like armor, shoulders squared, chin lifted, eyes scanning the farm with the calculating precision of a merchant assessing goods. 4 guards flanked him, their polished steel breastplates bearing the crest of a rising sun over mountains, a design Leon recognized from borderland nobility. The guards' hands rested near sword hilts, not threateningly but with professional readiness. "You are the farmer who sells miracles?" Lord Alden's voice carried across the field, crisp and demanding. He dismounted without waiting for invitation, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. Up close, Leon noted the nobleman's face, sharp features, lines of stress around eyes that held both desperation and suspicion. "I am Lord Alden of the Western Marches. My lands suffer a blight that withers crops within days. I've heard tales of a soup that healed a dragon knight's mortal wounds." Leon rose slowly, brushing dirt from his worn trousers. The noble's gaze swept over the farm, lingering on the glowing sprouts, the humming watering can, the too perfect symmetry of the vegetable rows. "Just good farming, my lord," Leon said, keeping his tone neutral. "Herbs and timing. Do not insult my intelligence." Alden stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The druid Kalen reported anomalies. And my own scouts confirm it. Something here defies natural law." He produced a withered wheat stalk from his cloak, its blackened husk crumbling at the touch. "This spread from my northern fields to the southern orchards in a fortnight. Every remedy fails. If you have power, name your price." The blight sample felt wrong in Leon's hand, not just dead, but actively consuming. He could sense the faint magical signature, something engineered rather than natural. Creating a cure would require more than simple herb blending. He considered refusing, but Alden's guards were watching the farm's perimeter, their eyes noting every unusual feature. Refusal might bring greater scrutiny. "Wait here," Leon said finally. Inside his modest cottage, Leon assessed his resources. The earth elemental cores from his potatoes glowed with steady amber light in their storage jar. He'd harvested them last week, merging common potatoes with fragments of mountain essence, a simple experiment to improve yield that had produced tubers with crystalline veins. Next to them sat a jar of blight-resistant fungus he'd cultivated from forest specimens, its white filaments pulsing with gentle life. Individually, they were just enhanced crops. Combined, Leon focused, calling upon his ultimate synthesis authority. The world narrowed to the 2 jars. He didn't just merge objects, he wove concepts, the fungus's resilient proliferation with the earth core's stabilizing essence. Energy flowed from him like blood from a wound, the headache intensifying to a sharp pain. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he visualized the merge, not just combining materials, but creating something that would recognize and neutralize the blight's unnatural signature. The jars shimmered, their contents swirling into a vortex of amber and white light. When it cleared, what remained was a fine, iridescent powder that seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting slightly in its container. Leon's knees buckled, he caught himself on the table, breathing heavily. The energy cost had been significant, leaving him lightheaded. He poured the powder into a cloth pouch, his hands trembling slightly. Outside, Lord Alden was examining the phoenix ember sprouts, his expression unreadable. "Your crops glow," he stated as Leon approached. "Rare seeds from the eastern markets," Leon lied smoothly, offering the pouch. "Mix this with water and sprinkle it over the infected areas. It should halt the blight within a day." Alden accepted the pouch, his fingers testing its weight. "Should? You sound uncertain for a miracle worker." "I'm a farmer, not a miracle worker. But that powder will work." Leon met the noble's gaze, keeping his exhaustion from showing. "Use it sparingly, a pinch per acre." One of Alden's guards, a woman with hawk-like eyes, leaned close to her lord. "The energy signature matches the reports, my lord. This is no simple fertilizer." Alden's suspicion didn't fade, but he tucked the pouch into his robes with careful reverence. "If this works, you'll have my gratitude and gold. If it fails—" He let the threat hang, then turned to mount his horse. As he settled into the saddle, he produced a sealed letter from his saddlebag. "For your troubles," he said, tossing it to Leon. "Consider it advance payment." The parchment landed at Leon's feet, its wax seal gleaming crimson in the morning light. The emblem pressed into the wax wasn't Alden's rising sun, it was the royal crest of the Holy Kingdom, twin serpents encircling a radiant crown. And scrawled across the front in elegant script, "To the synthesis sage." Leon's blood went cold. He looked up, but Alden was already riding away, his guards forming a protective formation around him. The noble didn't glance back, as if delivering such a letter was merely another transaction. The hoofbeats faded into the forest, leaving Leon alone with the sealed message and the dawning realization that his seclusion had just been breached at the highest level. He picked up the letter, the wax cool against his fingers. The royal crest seemed to pulse with latent magic, a tracking spell or perhaps just a statement of power. He considered burning it unopened, but that would solve nothing, whoever sent it knew where he was. Knew what he was. Inside the cottage, Leon placed the letter on his rough-hewn table. The headache from the synthesis had settled into a deep fatigue, but his mind raced. Alden hadn't been just a desperate noble, he'd been a messenger. The blight, the timing, the specific request for a miracle cure, it felt staged. A test. Through the window, Leon watched his farm. The self-watering can continued its gentle work. The phoenix ember sprouts glowed reassuringly. In the distance, he could just make out the golem scarecrow's silhouette moving methodically in the forest glade. All these creations, meant for simple farming, now felt like beacons drawing the world's attention. He didn't open the letter. Not yet. Instead, he went outside and began weeding the pumpkin patch with deliberate, grounding motions. Each pull of a weed, each adjustment of a vine, was an assertion of normalcy. But his eyes kept returning to the cottage, to where the sealed message waited on the table, a silent, crimson threat that promised his quiet farm life was about to become anything but quiet. The morning sun filtered through the wooden slats of Leon's farmhouse, casting warm stripes across the worn floorboards where the sealed letter lay. It had rested there since Lord Alden's departure yesterday, a silent accusation in cream-colored parchment stamped with the royal crest of the Holy Kingdom, a golden sun encircled by 7 stars, wax seal unbroken. Leon had avoided it through the evening chores, through tending his phoenix ember sprouts that glowed faintly in the twilight, through checking on the golem scarecrow still methodically tilling forest soil a quarter-mile away. But now, with dawn's light making the wax gleam like a warning, he could delay no longer. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the letter. The exhaustion from yesterday's merge still clung to his bones, a deep, marrow-level weariness that made even simple movements feel like wading through mud. Creating the blight treatment powder had required merging not just the fungus and earth elemental cores, but threading them through concepts of purification and renewal. The synthesis had left him hollowed out, his ultimate synthesis authority, feeling like a muscle strained past its limit. He broke the seal. The parchment unfolded with a crisp sound that seemed too loud in the quiet farmhouse. To the one who walks between realms, the letter began in elegant, flowing script. Your retirement has been noted. The balance you forged between heaven and hell remains, yet ripples emerge from the frontier that taste of your hand. A dragon knight healed by soup that sings with vitality. A golem that tills soil with purpose. A watering system that breathes with nymph essence. These are not the works of a simple farmer. Leon's breath caught. He read faster, his eyes scanning the lines. We do not seek confrontation. The Holy Kingdom remembers the debt owed to the synthesis sage who ended the war. But curiosity grows among those who watch the weave of fate. The druid Kalen's report confirms anomalies that cannot be explained by natural magic. Lord Alden's mission was twofold, to test your response to royal contact, and to deliver this warning. Warning. The word seemed to pulse on the page. Remain hidden if you wish, but know this, the barriers between mortal and divine grow thin around your farm. Every merge you perform leaves echoes in realms beyond. Sooner or later, something will come looking for the source. The letter ended without signature, but the royal crest at the bottom felt like a brand. Leon sank onto a stool, the parchment slipping from his fingers to flutter to the floor. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed up his throat. They knew. Not everything, not his exact location or current identity, but enough. The Holy Kingdom had connected the dots between the miracles and the missing synthesis sage. And if they had, how long before the gods themselves noticed? Or the demons? He stood abruptly, the stool scraping against wood. His eyes darted around the farmhouse, the simple hearth, the shelves of seeds, some glowing, some ordinary, the whole merged with dragon claw that leaned by the door. All of it suddenly felt like evidence. Every merge, every simple solution he'd crafted for farm problems, had been leaving breadcrumbs straight to his doorstep. Flee. The thought came with visceral urgency. Pack what he could carry, use his authority to merge, travel, with obscurity, disappear into the wilderness beyond the frontier. Start over somewhere even more remote, somewhere with no visitors, no rumors, no letters bearing royal seals. He took 2 steps toward the door before stopping. Outside, through the window, his farm spread in the morning light. Rows of potatoes whose tubers hummed with earth elemental energy. Pumpkin vines just beginning to flower, their leaves edged with silver from a previous merge with moonlight essence. The self-watering can moved on its own along a row, misting the phoenix ember sprouts with droplets pulled from the dawn air. And beyond the fence, in the forest glade, the golem scarecrow continued its endless, patient tilling, a guardian he'd created to scare off bandits, now become part of the land itself. This was his peace. This quiet corner of soil and growth he'd carved out after ending a war. He'd merged seclusion with forgetfulness on his legend, yes, but he'd also merged hope with this patch of earth. To run now would mean abandoning not just a farm, but the first real home he'd known since his reincarnation. Leon walked back to the fallen letter, picked it up, and read the warning again. The barriers between mortal and divine grow thin around your farm. Every merge you perform leaves echoes in realms beyond. The problem wasn't that he'd been found. The problem was that he was still visible. Still sending up signals with every synthesis. He needed to disappear properly. Not through running, but through hiding in plain sight. If the barriers were thin, he needed to thicken them. If his merges left echoes, he needed to silence those echoes. The solution formed in his mind with the clarity that always preceded a major synthesis. Not a tool or a crop this time, but a shield. A barrier woven from concepts themselves. He stepped outside, the morning air cool on his skin. The farm felt different now, not just a refuge, but a fortress under siege. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call, felt like potential surveillance. He walked to the center of his fields, where the pumpkin patch grew, and knelt in the soft soil. His ultimate synthesis authority stirred within him, a power that felt both infinite and terribly finite in this moment. He had used it heavily these past days, the golem scarecrow, the watering can, the blight treatment. Each merge had drained him, and now he could feel the reservoir of his energy sitting dangerously low. This next merge would be the most complex he'd attempted since retiring. Not merging physical objects, but abstract concepts into a living barrier. He closed his eyes and reached for the first concept, concealment. It wasn't a physical thing he could hold, but he could feel its essence, the way shadows hid in corners, the way secrets folded into silence, the way the forest swallowed sounds. He gathered that essence, pulling it from the world around him, feeling it coalesce in his mind like cool, dark silk. Then the second, illusion. This one came brighter, more slippery. The play of light on water that made depth deceptive. The mirage that turned desert air into lakes. The glamour that made ordinary things appear extraordinary, or extraordinary things appear ordinary. He gathered this too, feeling it shimmer like heat haze in his grasp. Now the merge. He brought the two concepts together in his mind's eye, concealment and illusion, and activated his authority. The world vanished. Not literally, but his perception of it did. He was no longer kneeling in soil, but floating in a void where only the two concepts existed. Concealment, dark and deep. Illusion, bright and shifting. His authority began weaving them together, thread by conceptual thread. He guided the merge with careful intent. Not just hiding the farm, but making it appear utterly ordinary to any magical or divine senses. Not just masking divine energies, but replacing them with the dull, magic-barren signature of the frontier that should be here. Not just creating a barrier, but making that barrier passive, self-sustaining, woven into the very fabric of the land so it required no active maintenance. The merge consumed him. Energy poured from his core like blood from a wound. He felt himself thinning, becoming transparent, as the concepts knitted together into something new, a barrier of concealed illusions, a cloak of ordinary seeming that would wrap around his entire farm. It would make his phoenix ember sprouts appear as simple glow moss. Make the golem scarecrow's energy read as natural earth elemental activity. Make his own presence feel like nothing more than a moderately skilled farmer with a touch of green thumb. But the cost. Oh, the cost. His vision darkened at the edges. His breathing came in ragged gasps. The reservoir of his synthesis energy, already depleted, dropped to levels he hadn't experienced since the final days of the Holy Demon War. He pushed more, forcing the merge to complete, weaving the final threads of the barrier. It snapped into place with a soundless vibration that shook the air. Leon collapsed forward, hands sinking into the soil. Black spots danced before his eyes. Nausea rolled through him in waves. He could feel the barrier now, a gentle, constant pressure in the air around his farm, like the world itself had taken a deep breath and held it. To anyone looking with magical senses, his farm would now appear exactly as it should, a simple frontier homestead with slightly better crops than average. Nothing divine. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing worth investigating. But he had paid for it. He tried to stand and failed, his legs refusing to bear his weight. The world tilted. He managed to crawl a few feet before darkness claimed him, there in the pumpkin patch with the morning sun climbing higher. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Consciousness returned in fragments. The feel of rough wool blankets. The smell of herbal tea gone cold. The ache in every muscle, deep and thorough. Leon opened his eyes to late afternoon light. He was in his bed, though he had no memory of getting there. The golem scarecrow must have found him and carried him inside. He'd programmed it with basic caretaking protocols during its creation. He tried to sit up, and the room spun violently. His synthesis energy was gone. Not just low, but utterly depleted. The well was dry, the reservoir empty. Using his ultimate synthesis authority, now would be like trying to draw water from a stone. He lay back, breathing slowly. The barrier was up, he could feel its gentle hum in the background of his awareness. It was working. No divine energies would leak out now. No more echoes with each merge. The farm was hidden. But he was vulnerable. For the first time since retiring, he had no reserves. If something came now, if the Holy Kingdom sent more than a letter, if Kalen returned with questions, if bandits came again, he would have to face it with nothing but his wits and whatever mundane tools were at hand. No more instant solutions. No more merging his way out of problems. He slept again, a deep, dreamless sleep that felt like sinking into cool mud. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Days passed in a haze of exhaustion. Leon moved through them like a ghost. He tended his crops with mechanical movements, ate simple meals that tasted of nothing, slept long hours as his body slowly began to rebuild the depleted reserves. The barrier held steady, a constant presence that slowly became background noise. He tested it once, reaching for his authority to merge two ordinary stones, just a tiny, simple merge to see if he could. Pain lanced through his skull, sharp and immediate, and he abandoned the attempt. Not yet. Not for a while. On the third day, as evening painted the sky in shades of violet and gold, Leon sat on his porch watching the fireflies emerge over his fields. The barrier made them appear slightly dimmer than they should be, their light softened by the illusion of ordinariness. It was working perfectly. Then he heard it. A distant roar, so deep it vibrated in his bones before it reached his ears. He froze, teacup halfway to his lips. The sound came again, closer this time. Not the roar of a bear or the cry of a great cat. This was something else entirely, a sound of scales scraping against sky, of furnace-hot breath, of ancient power moving through the world. It came from the northeast, from the direction of the Dragon's Teeth Mountains that bordered the frontier. Leon stood slowly, setting the teacup down with careful precision. He walked to the edge of his porch, eyes scanning the darkening sky. There, against the last light of sunset, a silhouette. Massive wings beating the air with slow, powerful strokes. A long, serpentine body trailing behind. A shape that belonged in legends, not in the quiet skies above a frontier farm. The dragon was still miles away, but approaching. And as it drew nearer, Leon could feel something, a pull, a resonance. The dragon wasn't just flying randomly. It was following a trail. A trail of residual energy left by his earlier merges, before he'd erected the barrier. The golem scarecrow's creation. The watering can's birth. The blight treatment's synthesis. All those merges had left faint echoes in the world, like ripples in a pond. And this dragon, attuned to magical energies, had caught the scent. It was coming straight for his farm. Leon watched as the dragon banked, turning directly toward his location. The barrier would hide the farm from its senses once it got close enough. But the residual trail led right to his doorstep. And dragons, he remembered from the war, were curious creatures. When they found the end of a magical trail that simply stopped, they tended to investigate. He had no energy for another merge. No way to create a solution. The barrier would hide the farm, but it wouldn't stop a physical dragon from landing in his fields if it decided to. The roar came again, much closer now. He could see the details of the creature, scales the color of tarnished copper, eyes that glowed like forged coals, wings that blotted out the stars as they passed overhead. It was circling now, searching for the source of the energy trail that had drawn it here. Leon stood perfectly still on his porch, watching as the dragon completed its first circle above his farm. The barrier hummed around him, doing its work. Making everything appear ordinary. Making him appear ordinary. The dragon roared again, this time in frustration. The energy trail ended here, but there was nothing to see. Just a farm. Just a farmer. Nothing worth a dragon's attention. It circled once more, lower this time. Leon could feel the wind from its wings, smell the ozone and sulfur scent of its breath. The great head turned, those forged coal eyes scanning the fields, the farmhouse, the man on the porch. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, Leon looked into the dragon's gaze. There was intelligence there, ancient and sharp. Curiosity. Confusion. The dragon hovered, wings beating slowly, as it studied him. Then, with a final, puzzled rumble, it banked away, climbing back into the night sky toward the mountains. Leon didn't move until the last beat of its wings faded into distance. Then he sank onto the porch steps, his legs suddenly weak. The barrier had worked. The dragon hadn't detected the farm's true nature. But it had seen him. And dragons remembered. He looked up at the stars now appearing in the darkening sky. The immediate threat had passed, but a new one had revealed itself. His earlier merges had left trails, and those trails could be followed. The barrier would prevent new trails, but the old ones still existed out there in the world, waiting to be found. And now a dragon knew there was something odd about this particular frontier farm. Leon sat there long into the night, listening to the sounds of his farm, the soft hiss of the self-watering can, the distant thump-thump-thump of the golem scarecrow tilling, the rustle of pumpkin leaves in the night breeze. His peace remained, but it felt more fragile than ever. Like glass that had been tapped and now carried a hairline crack, invisible but there. Somewhere in the mountains, a dragon roared again, distant now but still audible. A question hanging in the dark. The morning sun cast long shadows across Leon's fields, painting the dew-kissed pumpkin vines in shades of gold and emerald. He knelt beside a row of phoenix ember tomatoes, their fruits glowing with faint inner light like captured sunsets. The persistent headache from his depleted synthesis energy had dulled to a background throb, but the exhaustion remained, a deep weariness in his bones that made even simple tasks feel monumental. He was checking the self-watering system, the nymphessence watering can humming softly as it drew moisture from the morning mist, when the air changed. First came the scent, ozone and ancient stone, like a thunderstorm brewing over mountains. Then the sound, not the roar from days before, but a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the soil. Leon straightened slowly, his farmer's instincts screaming danger even as his rational mind noted the barrier he'd created. The concealment illusion merge should have made everything appear ordinary. Yet something was coming. The shadow fell across the field before he saw its source. Massive wings, copper bronze in the morning light, beat the air with deliberate slowness. The dragon was smaller than he'd expected, perhaps young, its scales still bright without the patina of centuries. It circled once, twice, its serpentine neck craning as it studied the farm below. Leon remained perfectly still, his hand resting on the handle of his dragon claw hoe. The tool felt warm against his palm, as if recognizing something kindred in the air. With surprising grace for a creature of its size, the dragon landed at the field's edge, its claws sinking into the soft earth without damaging a single pumpkin vine. It was perhaps 30 feet from nose to tail, its scales shimmering with metallic highlights where the sun caught them. Intelligent amber eyes, slit-pupilled like a cat's, fixed on the phoenix ember tomatoes. The beast lowered its head, nostrils flaring as it sniffed at the nearest plant. A soft rumble echoed in its chest, not a growl, Leon realized, but something closer to curiosity. The tomato's glow seemed to intensify under the dragon's attention, the phoenix essence within reacting to the draconic presence. Leon's mind raced. The barrier should have hidden everything. But the dragon had been here before, circling when he'd been too exhausted to notice properly. It must have caught the residual energy trail from earlier merges, the golem scarecrow's creation, perhaps, or the nymph watering can. Now it had returned, drawn back by whatever scent or memory lingered. He could feel the faintest trickle of synthesis energy returning, not enough for anything complex, but perhaps just enough for one small, careful merge. If he could satisfy the dragon's curiosity without conflict. The dragon nudged a tomato vine with its snout, the gesture surprisingly delicate. The plant trembled, and one of the glowing fruits detached, rolling toward Leon's feet. The beast watched him, waiting. Leon picked up the tomato. Warmth pulsed through his fingers, the phoenix embers within reacting to his touch. He glanced at the nearest pumpkin patch, his prized autumn bounty, their orange skins already showing the first hints of the perfect ripeness he'd been cultivating. An idea formed, fragile but possible. He walked to the largest pumpkin, its vine thick and healthy. The dragon watched, head tilted. Leon placed one hand on the pumpkin's cool surface, the other still holding the phoenix ember tomato. He closed his eyes, reaching for that trickle of synthesis energy. It came slowly, like water seeping through cracked earth. He focused not on power, but on essence, on the concept of dragon as he'd felt it in his hoe, in the air around this creature. Not scales or fire, but something deeper, ancient patience, territorial curiosity, the satisfaction of finding something worthy of attention. He merged the concepts. Pumpkin. Dragon scale essence. Not the physical scale, but the memory of it, the way light played across copper bronze, the satisfying weight of something both delicate and enduring. The energy drain was sharp and immediate. Leon gasped, his knees buckling as the last easy reserves vanished. But when he opened his eyes, the pumpkin had changed. Its orange skin now bore subtle metallic patterning, like veins of copper ore. The surface felt different under his fingers, smoother, with a faint warmth that hadn't been there before. And the scent, it carried notes of sun-warmed stone and something sweetly earthy. Leon carefully detached the pumpkin from its vine. It was heavier than it looked, the weight substantial in his arms. He turned and offered it to the dragon. The beast sniffed, then made that curious rumbling sound again. Delicately, impossibly delicately for jaws that could crush stone, it took the pumpkin from Leon's hands. There was a moment of consideration, amber eyes studying both pumpkin and farmer. Then the dragon bit down. The sound was crisp, like breaking autumn leaves. The beast chewed slowly, thoughtfully. Leon watched as the dragon's posture changed, the slight tension in its wings easing, the alertness in its eyes softening to something approaching contentment. It finished the pumpkin, licked its chops with a tongue like rough leather, and made a soft chuffing sound. It wasn't submission. It wasn't dominance. It was acknowledgement. The dragon lowered its head until its snout was level with Leon's chest. Warm breath, smelling of ozone and something like cinnamon, washed over him. The beast nudged him gently, not a push, but a touch. Then it turned and began grooming one foreclaw with meticulous attention. Leon sank to the ground, the energy depletion hitting him fully now. He leaned against a fence post, watching as the dragon spent the next hour exploring the field's edges with casual interest. It sniffed at the golem scarecrow, now standing motionless in its tilled forest plot, and made a dismissive snort. It investigated the watering can, watching with apparent fascination as it drew moisture from the air. But mostly, it just existed. It basked in the morning sun, wings spread to catch the warmth. It watched birds with idle curiosity. Once, it caught a rabbit that had been nibbling at Leon's carrots, but instead of eating it, it simply carried the terrified creature to the field's boundary and released it with what seemed like draconic amusement. As the sun climbed toward noon, the dragon stretched, its scales rippling like liquid metal. It looked at Leon one last time, those intelligent eyes holding something unreadable. Then it beat its wings, lifting into the air with a gust that stirred the pumpkin vines. Leon watched it climb, a copper-bronze shape against the blue sky. It circled once, a farewell, perhaps, and then flew east, toward the distant mountains. Only when it was a speck on the horizon did Leon push himself to his feet. His body protested every movement, the synthesis energy depletion leaving him feeling hollowed out. He walked to where the dragon had been basking, intending to check for any damage to his crops. There, nestled in the impression left by the dragon's body, lay a single scale. It was about the size of Leon's palm, copper-bronze like the rest, but with an odd iridescence along its edges. He picked it up. The scale was warm, as if still holding the dragon's body heat, and surprisingly light. He turned it over in his hands, studying the intricate patterning. Then it pulsed. A soft, golden light emanated from the scale's center, not the dragon's natural energy, but something else. Something familiar in a way that made Leon's breath catch. Holy energy. Pure, distilled, and unmistakably linked to the merged heaven-hell realm he'd created years ago. The light pulsed again, rhythmic like a heartbeat. With each pulse, Leon felt a faint echo, a resonance with the barrier he'd created around his farm, with the very fabric of the synthesis that had ended the war. The scale wasn't just a dragon's shed skin. It was, marked. Infused with something that shouldn't be there. He stared at the eastern horizon where the dragon had vanished. The young beast had been curious about his farm, drawn by residual synthesis energy. But if this scale pulsed with holy energy from the merged realms, then the dragon hadn't just stumbled upon his farm by chance. It had been touched by the very forces Leon thought he'd left behind. And now it was flying east, carrying that connection with it. The scale pulsed a third time in his hand, the golden light casting strange shadows across his fingers. Leon closed his fist around it, the warmth seeping into his skin. The exhaustion was still there, the energy depletion a weight he couldn't shake. But beneath it, a new tension coiled, the understanding that his quiet farm life, his carefully constructed seclusion, might be unraveling in ways he hadn't anticipated. In the distance, the golem scarecrow began its afternoon tilling, its movements methodical and unaware. The watering can hummed. The phoenix ember tomatoes glowed. And in Leon's hand, the dragon's scale pulsed with holy light, a silent beacon connecting his hidden farm to a world he tried to leave behind. The morning after the dragon's visit dawned with a peculiar stillness. Leon stood by his farmhouse window, the shed copper scale resting on his workbench, its faint holy pulse like a heartbeat in the quiet room. He'd placed it there after the dragon's departure, intending to study it once his synthesis energy recovered further. But now, as he watched the first light touch his pumpkin patch, he felt a shift in the air, not the wind, but something deeper, like the world itself holding its breath. His concealment illusion barrier hummed at the edge of his awareness, a delicate weave of magic that made his farm appear as nothing more than a humble frontier homestead to any prying senses. Yet the scale's energy, though muted, seemed to resonate with something beyond the barrier. Leon's fingers traced the rough wood of the windowsill. His synthesis reserves were still dangerously low, the fatigue from the previous merges lingering in his bones like a persistent chill. He'd hoped for days of uninterrupted recovery, time to tend his glowing elemental sprouts and let the animated golem scarecrow continue its autonomous tilling in the forest clearing. But the scale's presence felt like a beacon he hadn't anticipated. Outside, the golem scarecrow moved with methodical grace, its stone-and-wood body turning soil near the tree lean. The phoenix ember sprouts in Leon's garden glowed with a soft, warm light, their leaves shimmering with elemental energy. Everything appeared peaceful, ordinary under the barrier's illusion. Yet Leon's instincts, honed from centuries as the synthesis master, prickled with unease. He picked up the dragon scale, its surface cool but thrumming with that subtle holy resonance. It was linked to the merged heaven-hell realm he'd created, a remnant of his past life he tried to leave behind. As he turned the scale in his hand, the air in the room thickened. A scent of ripe wheat and sun-baked earth filled the space, rich and overwhelming. Leon's breath caught. This wasn't from his farm. The barrier should have masked such energies. But the scale's pulse quickened, synchronizing with something approaching from beyond. He stepped outside, the scale still in his grip. The morning sun cast long shadows across his land, but to the east, over the forest where the dragon had flown, the light seemed to warp. Colors deepened, the greens of leaves becoming emerald, the browns of soil turning to bronze. A figure materialized at the forest's edge, not walking into view but simply appearing, as if woven from the very air. She stood tall, her form shimmering with an ethereal glow that the barrier couldn't fully conceal. Her hair flowed like golden grain, and her eyes held the depth of harvest moons. A simple robe of woven stalks draped her body, and in her hand, she held a sickle that gleamed with divine light. Leon recognized her immediately from ancient lore: Ceres, minor goddess of harvest, fertility, and the turning of seasons. Her presence here, drawn by the scale's energy, was a complication he hadn't foreseen. Ceres' gaze swept over the farm, her divine senses probing. The barrier held, making the golem scarecrow look like a crude wooden post. The phoenix ember sprouts appear as ordinary vegetables. But her eyes lingered on Leon, and then on the scale in his hand. She took a step forward, and the earth beneath her feet bloomed with wildflowers, their petals unfolding in an instant. "You," she said, her voice a melody of rustling leaves and distant thunderstorms. "This place sings with echoes of creation. And you hold a scale touched by the merged realms. Explain yourself, mortal." Leon's mind raced. His synthesis energy was depleted, a complex merge was out of the question. He needed to deflect, to maintain the facade of a simple farmer. He bowed slightly, keeping his movements slow, unthreatening. "My lady," he said, his tone carefully measured. "I am but a farmer tending his land. This scale was left by a passing dragon. I know little of its origins." Ceres' eyes narrowed. She raised her sickle, and the light around it intensified, piercing through the barrier's illusion for a moment. Leon felt a surge of divine scrutiny, a sensation like roots digging into his soul, seeking truth. The scale in his hand pulsed brighter, as if responding to her power. "Do not dissemble," Ceres said, her voice hardening. "I sense the residue of synthesis here. Faint, masked, but undeniable. The energy trails lead to you. Who are you truly?" Leon's heart pounded. The barrier was straining under her direct attention. If she pushed further, his concealment might fail. He needed to calm her, to satisfy her curiosity without revealing his identity. An idea formed, simple, yet risky given his depleted state. He gestured to his farmhouse. "Please, rest a moment. I have tea brewing. Perhaps we can speak without accusations." Ceres hesitated, her divine aura flickering. She was a harvest goddess, not a warrior, and Leon's offer of hospitality seemed to give her pause. After a long moment, she nodded, her sickle lowering slightly. "Very well. But do not think to deceive me further." Inside the farmhouse, Leon moved to his stove, where a kettle steamed. His hands trembled faintly from fatigue, but he forced them steady. On a shelf, he kept dried tea leaves from a previous harvest, ordinary leaves, but he had a plan. As Ceres stood by the doorway, her presence filling the small room with the scent of orchards and fertile soil, Leon focused on his ultimate synthesis authority. He had so little energy left, but he needed to merge the tea leaves with tranquility, a conceptual essence he could draw from the peaceful ambience of his farm, from the calm he desperately sought. He poured the leaves into a pot, his mind reaching for that sense of stillness. It was a delicate merge, requiring finesse rather than power. He visualized the leaves absorbing the quiet of dawn, the serenity of growing things, the gentle rhythm of his farm life. His synthesis energy, already threadbare, strained at the effort. A wave of dizziness washed over him, dark spots dancing at the edges of his vision. He leaned against the counter, breathing deeply. Ceres watched, her divine senses attuned to the subtle shift in the air. "What are you doing, farmer?" she asked, her tone less hostile now, tinged with curiosity. "Brewing tea, my lady," Leon said, his voice tight with concentration. "A special blend for guests." The merge completed with a soft, almost imperceptible shimmer. The tea leaves in the pot glowed faintly, then settled, their aroma transforming from earthy to something ethereal, like morning dew on silent fields. Leon poured the tea into 2 cups, his hand steadying as the dizziness receded to a mild, persistent throb behind his eyes. He offered a cup to Ceres. She took it, her fingers brushing his, and a jolt of divine energy passed between them. She sipped, and her expression shifted. The hardness in her eyes softened, the tension in her shoulders eased. The tea's merged properties, tranquility infused into every leaf, worked on her divine essence, soothing her suspicions without dulling her senses. She drank slowly, her gaze drifting to the window, to the peaceful farm beyond. "This tea," she murmured. "It carries a peace I have not tasted in ages. Since the realms merged, chaos has reigned in the divine courts. But here." She trailed off, taking another sip. Leon sat across from her, sipping his own tea. The mild dizziness lingered, a reminder of his precarious energy state. "I seek only a quiet life, my lady." This farm is my sanctuary. The scale, the energy trails, they are remnants of things beyond my control. I mean no disturbance. Ceres studied him over the rim of her cup. The divine scrutiny returned, but gentler now, tempered by the tea's influence. You speak truth, yet not the whole truth. But your intentions seem benign. This place is oddly harmonious, despite the anomalies. She finished her tea, placing the cup down with care. I will not press further today. But know this, farmer, the higher gods are watching. The merged realms have left gaps in our understanding, and anything unusual draws attention. This scale's energy is a beacon. I must report what I have sensed, anomalies, if not threats. Leon's stomach tightened. Must you, my lady? Can this not remain between us? I want no part of divine politics. Ceres stood, her form beginning to shimmer again. I am bound by my duties. But your tea has given me pause. I will report only anomalies, not accusations. For now. She turned to leave, then glanced back. Tend your land well, farmer. And hide your secrets better. The storms are gathering. With that, she dissolved into motes of light, the scent of harvest fading with her. Leon remained seated, the empty cups before him. The mild dizziness from the merge settled into a dull ache, but his mind was clear. He looked out the window. To the east, where Ceres had vanished, the sky darkened. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, not natural ones, their edges glowed with divine light, swirling with colors that spoke of celestial scrutiny. They were distant yet, but moving closer, a silent promise of further attention. Leon rose, his body weary but his resolve firm. The barrier had held, but barely. His synthesis energy was now even lower, the merge with tranquility having tapped into his fragile reserves. He picked up the dragon scale, its holy pulse a constant reminder of the past he couldn't escape. Outside, the golem scarecrow continued its work, unaware of the divine visit. The phoenix ember sprouts glowed softly, their light a small comfort in the gathering gloom. He stepped out into the farmyard, the first chill wind of the approaching storm brushing his skin. The clouds loomed, their divine nature unmistakable now, a sign that Ceres's report would bring more than just curiosity. Leon's peaceful farm life, already strained by visitors and mythical creatures, now faced the direct scrutiny of gods. And he, with his depleted energy and hidden identity, would need to find a way to navigate the coming tempest without losing everything he'd built. The afternoon sun hung low over Leon's farm, casting long shadows from the scarecrow golem that still methodically tilled the forest's edge. Leon sat on the rough-hewn bench outside his stall, a cup of the tranquility-infused tea cooling in his hands. His body felt hollow, like a vessel drained to its dregs. The strain from merging tranquility with the tea leaves yesterday had left him with a persistent, dull ache behind his eyes, and his synthesis energy reserves, already critically low from the concealment illusion barrier and the dragon scale pumpkin, were now a mere whisper. He could sense the barrier humming faintly around the farm's perimeter, masking the divine energies, but it felt fragile, like a thin pane of glass under pressure. He watched the phoenix ember sprouts glowing softly in their beds, their elemental light muted by the barrier's illusion to appear as ordinary, if vibrant, vegetables. The dragon scale he'd found pulsed gently in his pocket, a warm reminder of the holy energy that had drawn both dragon and goddess. Leon's fingers tightened around the teacup. Peace was becoming a precarious balancing act. Every merge, every solution to a minor problem, seemed to ripple outward, pulling the attention of the very world he tried to leave behind. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats on the dirt road. Not the casual trot of a local traveler, but the deliberate, measured pace of multiple riders. Leon set down his tea and stood, his movements careful to hide the weariness that made his joints feel stiff. 4 figures emerged from the tree line, riding sturdy, travel-worn horses. They wore mismatched armor, a patchwork of polished steel and scarred leather that spoke of many battles, not a unified livery. Their faces were hard, etched with the lines of veterans, and their eyes scanned the farm with a predatory sharpness that set Leon's nerves on edge. They dismounted near the stall, their movements coordinated and silent. The leader, a man with a salt and pepper beard and a missing ear, stepped forward. His gaze swept over the stall, the farmhouse, the fields, lingering on the scarecrow golem for a moment too long. Leon felt a cold knot form in his stomach. These weren't curious nobles or lost knights. Their posture, their silence, the way their hands rested near weapon hilts, they were scouts. Hunters. Afternoon, the leader said, his voice gravelly. Heard there's a farmer here sells special wares. Remedies. That true? Leon forced a mild smile, the one he practiced for visitors. I grow vegetables and brew tea. Simple things. If you're hungry, I have some pumpkins. One of the scouts, a younger woman with a crossbow strapped to her back, snorted softly. Her eyes, sharp as flint, studied Leon's face. We're not here for pumpkins. We're looking for information. About a man. They call him the Synthesis Sage. The name hung in the air like a struck bell. Leon kept his expression neutral, but inside, his mind raced. These were former enemies from the Holy Demon War. He could see it in the faint, faded sigils on their armor, remnants of both holy and demonic allegiances that had been scratched out or painted over. Scouts who'd survived the merging of heaven and hell, now drifting, perhaps hired by factions like the Holy Kingdom to find the one who'd ended it all. The barrier masked his divine energy, but it couldn't hide his face from those who might have seen him in the war's final days. The Synthesis Sage. Leon repeated, feigning ignorance. Sounds like a story for children. I'm just a farmer. This is a quiet place. The leader's eyes narrowed. Quiet places often hide loud secrets. We've followed trails, energy residues, odd creatures drawn to this valley. A dragon was seen here days ago. A goddess manifested nearby yesterday. Coincidences pile up. Leon's heart beat faster. They'd connected the dots. The dragon scale in his pocket seemed to grow warmer, as if reacting to their scrutiny. He needed to end this quickly, before they probed deeper. But his synthesis energy was so depleted that even the thought of a merge made his head throb. He had one card left to play, drawn from the very legend he tried to bury. He slowly reached into his pocket, not for the dragon scale, but as if fetching a coin. His fingers brushed against the residual essence of his own past, the merge of seclusion with forgetfulness he'd used to fade his legend. It was still there, a faint echo in his soul. He could tap into it, but it would cost him dearly. I'm afraid I can't help you, Leon said, his voice steady. But perhaps a drink for your travels. My tea is clarifying. He turned to the stall, pretending to fumble with the kettle. As he did, he focused inward, grasping at the dregs of his synthesis energy. It felt like trying to lift a mountain with bare hands. Pain lanced through his temples, bright and sharp. He visualized the merge, misdirection and forgetfulness. Not a physical merge, but an application, a subtle weaving of concepts into the air around them, targeting their memories of this encounter, of the trails that led here. The leader stepped closer, suspicion hardening his features. We don't want tea. We want answers. Who are you really? Leon didn't answer. Instead, he let the merge unfold. It was a feeble thing, strained and thin, like a frayed thread. He felt his energy plummet, diving from a whisper into nothingness. A cold sweat broke out on his brow, and his vision swam. The scouts' faces blurred for a moment, their expressions shifting from suspicion to confusion. What were we? The younger woman muttered, shaking her head. The leader blinked, his gaze losing its focus. This farm, it's just a farm. Why did we stop here? Leon leaned against the stall, his breathing shallow. You looked lost. The road east is that way. He pointed a trembling hand. The scouts exchanged bewildered glances. The merge had worked, but imperfectly. It clouded their immediate memories, made the farm seem unimportant, but Leon could see the effort hadn't fully erased their purpose. They were left with a vague sense of disorientation, like waking from a dream they couldn't recall. Right, the leader said, rubbing his temples. East. We should keep moving. They mounted their horses without another word, their movements sluggish, confused. As they rode away, the leader glanced back once, his eyes vacant, before turning to the road. Leon watched until they disappeared into the trees, the hoofbeats fading into the distance. Then, his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the bench, his body trembling with exhaustion. The merge had drained him critically. His synthesis energy was gone, not just low, but utterly spent. He felt empty, a shell. The world around him seemed to dim, the colors of the farm leaching away into gray. The barrier still held, but he had no strength to reinforce it, to maintain it. He was defenseless. He sat there for a long time, watching the sky darken as evening approached. The scarecrow golem continued its work, unaware of its master's plight. Leon's thoughts were sluggish, filled with a deep, weary regret. He'd wanted solitude, simplicity, just to grow perfect pumpkins and brew divine tea. But every action, every merge, pulled him deeper into the storm. The scouts were gone, but they were just the vanguard. Ceres had vowed to report to higher gods. The Holy Kingdom's spies were still out there. And now, with his energy spent, he had nothing left to shield himself. As night fell, the first stars pricked the violet sky. Leon pushed himself up from the bench, his movements slow and painful. He needed to rest, to recover, but the field called to him, a habit born of years tending the land. He stumbled toward the pumpkin patch, where the merged pumpkins glowed with a soft, internal light, their surfaces etched with faint, dragon-scale patterns. He knelt beside them, his hands sinking into the cool soil. And then, the air changed. It grew heavy, charged with a pressure that made Leon's ears pop. The barrier around the farm flickered, a visible shimmer in the darkness, before dissolving with a sound like shattered glass. Leon looked up, his heart freezing in his chest. A portal tore open in the middle of his field, a rift of swirling light and shadow that cast eerie, dancing illumination over the pumpkins. From it stepped figures, tall, radiant beings with eyes like stars, and others, darker, wreathed in flickering flames and shadows. A coalition of gods and demons, their presence crushing the air, making the very ground tremble. At their head stood a figure Leon recognized instantly, a being of balanced light and darkness, with features etched from both heaven and hell, who had once stood beside him at the war's end. Leon tried to rise, but his body failed him. His vision blurred at the edges, darkness creeping in. As the figures advanced, their gazes locking onto him with a mixture of shock and grim realization, Leon collapsed forward into the dirt, his last sight the perfect pumpkins glowing beside him, and the looming shadows of the past he could never escape. Leon's body felt like a hollowed-out gourd as he pushed himself up from the damp soil. The night air was thick with the scent of upturned earth and ozone, the latter emanating from the still crackling portal that hovered like a wound in reality at the edge of his pumpkin patch. Through blurred vision, he counted 7 figures standing in a semicircle before him. Their silhouettes were backlit by the portal's violet and gold light, casting long, distorted shadows across his neat rows of glowing phoenix ember sprouts. He recognized the leader immediately, even after centuries. Valerius. Once a celestial archon who had fought beside Leon during the final days of the Holy Demon War, his silver armor now bore the tarnish of time and the subtle, twisting sigils of infernal pacts. Valerius's wings, once feathered in pure light, were now skeletal frameworks of shadow and fractured crystal. He held a spear whose tip shimmered with both holy radiance and hellfire. Leon, Valerius's voice was a discordant chorus, layered with celestial harmony and demonic gravel. Or should I still call you Synthesis Sage? You were always terrible at staying dead. Leon's knees trembled as he forced himself to stand fully. The exhaustion was a physical weight, a leaden fatigue that seeped into his marrow. His, ultimate synthesis authority, felt like a dried-up well, the last dregs of energy spent on that desperate merge of misdirection and forgetfulness. He could feel the broken remnants of his concealment illusion barrier like shattered glass underfoot, each fragment whispering of failed secrecy. Valerius, Leon managed, his voice raspy. I retired. Retired? A demon to Valerius's left snorted, her form shifting between a beautiful woman with obsidian skin and a creature of molten rock. You merged heaven and hell, then vanished. Now your retirement is sending ripples through every realm. Sentient golems tilling forests. Dragons carrying traces of holy synthesis. Minor gods getting drunk on your tea. You've turned this backwater into an anomaly. Leon's gaze drifted past them to his farm. His animated golem scarecrow stood frozen mid-tilt near the tree lean, its stone anwood form sensing the threat but lacking any directive from its exhausted creator. The pumpkin patch, his pride, glowed softly with the residual energy of the dragon scale merge from days prior. Each pumpkin was a perfect sphere of orange, veined with faint golden light. I'm just farming, Leon said, the simplicity of the statement feeling absurd even to him. Valerius took a step forward, his armored boots crushing a phoenix ember sprout. The plant released a small shower of harmless sparks. Your farming is destabilizing the balance we fought to create. The Holy Kingdom is mobilizing inquisitors. Demon lords are whispering about a new power source. Even the neutral pantheons are curious. That barrier you shattered tonight? It was the only thing keeping the more ambitious factions from descending en masse. Leon's mind raced through options he didn't have. Fight? Impossible. Run. Where? His body could barely stand. Hide. The best hiding place he'd ever created was now in pieces around them. He looked at the coalition, 3 celestials whose light had grown cold and pragmatic, 3 demons whose fire had been tempered by strange alliances, and Valerius in the center, a walking treaty of contradictions. Then he remembered the dragon scale in his pocket. The one that pulsed with holy energy from the merged realms. And he remembered the core principle of the heaven-hell merge, not destruction, but forced coexistence. A terrible, beautiful paradox. You formed a coalition, Leon said slowly, his mind working through the fog of exhaustion. That means you're already negotiating. You have talks. Treaties. Fragile ones, said a celestial with eyes like distant stars. Your creations threaten to unravel them. Every lord and god wants your power for themselves. Leon took a deep breath, feeling the last embers of his synthesis energy, a faint, guttering spark deep in his core. It wasn't enough for anything substantial. Maybe not even enough to merge 2 pebbles. But concepts were lighter. He'd merged seclusion with forgetfulness on his own legend. He'd merged misdirection with forgetfulness just hours ago. Those were abstract. Weightless in the physical sense, but heavy with meaning. What if, Leon said, his voice gaining a thread of strength, I gave you something better than my power? Something that would strengthen your treaties instead of breaking them? Valerius's spear lowered slightly. Explain. The problem isn't my pumpkins or my tea, Leon said, gesturing weakly to his farm. The problem is everyone seeing them as weapons or prizes. As things to be claimed. But what if they were bridges? He closed his eyes, reaching for that last spark of energy. He thought of the endless debates during the war's peace negotiations. The careful wording of accords. The tense handshakes between eternal enemies. He reached for the concept of diplomacy, not the false kind, but the real, grinding, imperfect work of finding common ground. And he paired it with neutrality, not as indifference, but as the active choice to stand between, to mediate, to be the ground upon which opposites could meet. His hands glowed faintly, a pale gold light that flickered like a dying candle. The coalition members tensed, weapons rising, but Valerius held up a hand. Wait. Leon wasn't merging objects. He was merging ideas, drawing them from the very fabric of the merged realm he'd created centuries ago. The energy wasn't coming from within him, it was pulling from the dragon scale in his pocket, from the residual synthesis in his soil, from the memory of the heaven-hell merge itself. It was the last echo of his greatest work. Between his palms, light coalesced into a simple object, a stone tablet, rough-hewn as if from a mountain's heart. On its surface, lines appeared not as carved text, but as living light, celestial gold and infernal crimson weaving together into a single, complex pattern. It was a map of sorts, but of relationships rather than places. A visual representation of balance. The accord stone, Leon whispered, the words costing him. He could feel the last of his energy draining away, not just depleted but severed, as if the connection to his, ultimate synthesis authority, was being burned out. The tablet hovered for a moment before settling into Valerius's waiting hand. It doesn't compel peace, Leon said, sinking to one knee, the world swimming around him. It just makes the path clearer. When negotiations stall, it will show common ground. When tensions rise, it will highlight shared interests. It's a tool for what you're already trying to do. Valerius studied the tablet, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the weaving lights. The celestial and demon members of the coalition leaned in, their animosity momentarily forgotten in their curiosity. The stone pulsed softly, and for a moment, Leon saw their auras, normally clashing colors, begin to harmonize, blending at the edges where they touched the stone's influence. This changes nothing about your creations, the molten demon said, though her voice had lost some of its heat. Then see them as I do, Leon gasped, the frailty settling into his bones like a permanent chill. Not as weapons. As experiments in coexistence. A pumpkin grown with dragon-scale essence. Tea blended with tranquility. A golem that tills soil instead of crushing skulls. They're proof that synthesis doesn't have to mean conflict. Silence stretched, broken only by the distant chirp of night insects and the soft hum of the accord stone. Valerius finally nodded, a slow, heavy gesture. We will take this to the Grand Council. Your farm will be observed, not assaulted. For now. He turned to the others. The immediate threat is contained. We have what we came for, not his power, but a tool to preserve the peace we've built. Disperse. Report. One by one, the coalition members stepped back into the portal, their forms dissolving into the light. Valerius was the last. He looked at Leon, crouched in the dirt, looking every bit the frail farmer he pretended to be. You sacrificed your remaining synthesis energy for this, Valerius stated, not asking. Leon nodded weakly. A fair trade. Perhaps. Rest, Leon. The world isn't done with you yet. Then Valerius was gone, and the portal snapped shut with a sound like tearing silk, leaving only the normal night and the scent of ozone fading on the breeze. Leon collapsed fully onto his back, staring at the stars. The exhaustion was complete now, a hollowed-out feeling that went beyond physical tiredness. He could still sense his farm, his creations, but the active power, the ability to merge, to synthesize, was gone. Extinguished. The price of the Accord Stone. He lay there for long minutes, breathing in the smell of soil and pumpkin vines. The immediate danger had passed. The coalition was negotiating. His farm was safe. He'd preserved his quiet life, at the cost of the very power that had threatened it. The irony was almost beautiful. Then a movement caught his eye. At the far edge of the pumpkin patch, where the glow of the dragon scale-enhanced pumpkins was brightest, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the forest. Leon squinted, his vision blurry. One of the demons, the one who had been most skeptical, the one whose form shifted between woman and molten rock, hadn't fully left with the others. She'd lingered, hidden, and now she was moving with purposeful, silent steps toward the largest pumpkin in the patch, its surface gleaming with faint golden veins. She wasn't heading for the house. She wasn't coming for Leon. She was making straight for his prized pumpkin, her hand outstretched, fingers already beginning to glow with hungry, crimson light. Leon tried to push himself up, but his arms trembled and gave way. He opened his mouth to shout, but only a dry rasp emerged. He could only watch as the rogue demon reached the pumpkin, her shadow falling across its glowing surface, her intent as clear as the stars above, to take what the coalition had agreed to leave, to claim a piece of synthesis power for herself before the treaties could be finalized. And Leon, utterly spent, defenseless, could do nothing but lie in the dirt and witness the approach of a new, immediate threat to the peace he'd just bought at such terrible cost. The air smelled of ozone and burnt earth, a lingering scent from the coalition's departure that now mingled with something fouler, sulfur and molten rock. Leon lay on his back in the pumpkin patch, his body a hollow vessel. The severance of his synthesis power wasn't just an emptiness, it was a phantom limb that still ached with the ghost of creation. He could feel the dragon scale-enhanced pumpkins thrumming nearby, their golden-orange skins glowing faintly with residual energy, each one a testament to what he could no longer do. He pushed himself up on trembling elbows, the soil cool and damp against his palms. Every movement sent waves of fatigue through him, deeper than mere exhaustion. This was the price of the Accord Stone, not just spent energy, but a permanent severance. His ultimate synthesis authority was gone, leaving only the memory of its potential. A guttural roar shattered the twilight stillness. Leon's head snapped toward the sound. At the edge of the pumpkin patch, where the golem scarecrow guardian stood sentinel, a figure wreathed in molten rock and shadow was tearing through the animated constructs. The rogue demon, the same one who had broken from the coalition, moved with terrifying purpose. Its form shifted between solid stone and flowing lava, claws of obsidian ripping through the scarecrow golems as if they were parchment. One guardian, its wooden body merged with earth elemental cores, raised a stone fist, but the demon melted it with a touch, the golem collapsing into a pile of slag and splinters. It's after the synthesis artifacts, Leon thought, the realization cold and clear. The demon wanted the power embedded in his creations, the dragon-scale pumpkins, perhaps even the remnants of the golems themselves. Without his synthesis ability, Leon had nothing but his hands and whatever lay around him. He staggered to his feet, his vision swimming. The farm stretched before him, the pumpkin patch with its glowing fruits, the tea plants shimmering with tranquility, the hawthorn bushes where spies had once hidden. All of it was defenseless. He stumbled toward the toolshed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Inside, the hoe merged with a dragon's claw leaned against the wall, but even lifting it felt impossible now. His muscles screamed in protest, weakened by the severance. Another roar echoed, closer this time. Leon peered out the shed door. The demon had destroyed 3 of the scarecrow golems and was now advancing on the pumpkin vines themselves. Its molten hands reached for the nearest pumpkin, the one that glowed brightest with dragon-scale energy. The air around it shimmered with heat distortion. Leon's mind raced. He had no synthesis power, but the farm itself was a tapestry of his past merges. The soil was rich with earth elemental cores from the potatoes he'd grown, the air still hummed with the tranquility from the tea, even the broken golems bled residual synthesis energy into the ground. He remembered the principle behind his authority, merging two entities into something greater. Could he merge without the active power? Could he use what was already there? He dropped to his knees at the edge of the patch, ignoring the pain that lanced through his joints. The demon was mere yards away, its attention fixed on the pumpkins. Leon pressed his hands into the soil, feeling its texture, cool, loamy, alive with faint magic. This wasn't just dirt, it was a repository of everything he'd created. He thought of the phoenix ember seeds he'd planted, the elemental sprouts that had grown here, the vitality he'd once merged into soup for Elara. My own vitality, he realized. It was all he had left to give. He closed his eyes, focusing not on synthesis as an active power, but as a sacrifice. He imagined his life force, the strength in his limbs, the clarity in his mind, the very heat of his blood, flowing out through his hands and into the earth. It wasn't a merge in the traditional sense, it was a desperate offering, a last-ditch infusion of self into soil. He visualized the two entities, his dwindling vitality and the farm's enriched earth. He willed them to combine, to create something that could protect what remained. At first, nothing happened. The demon's claw closed around the glowing pumpkin, and Leon felt a surge of despair. Then, a warmth spread from his palms, not the fiery heat of creation, but a slow, deep burn that traveled up his arms and into his chest. It was his own life being siphoned away. The soil beneath his hands began to glow, a soft, golden light that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. Vines of pure energy erupted from the ground, not from the pumpkins, but from the earth itself. They wove together into a latticework barrier that rose between the demon and the patch, shimmering with hues of amber and emerald. The demon recoiled, hissing as the barrier repelled its molten touch. The energy vines thickened, drawing strength from the soil's elemental cores and from Leon's fading vitality. He could feel each second as a tangible loss, a piece of his health, his resilience, being torn away and woven into the defense. His vision darkened at the edges, and a cold sweat broke out on his brow. The barrier held, but it was temporary, he could sense it decaying even as it stood, fueled by a finite resource. The demon snarled, launching itself at the barrier again. Obsidian claws struck the energy vines, sending sparks flying. The barrier shuddered but didn't break. Leon gritted his teeth, pouring more of himself into the merge. He thought of the farm not as a collection of crops, but as an extension of his retirement, his quiet life, his peace, his simple desire to grow perfect pumpkins. That desire became part of the barrier, hardening it against the demon's assault. For a long minute, they were locked in stalemate. The demon battered against the glowing vines, each impact sending tremors through the ground. Leon knelt, his hands still buried in the soil, his body shaking with the effort. He could feel his vitality ebbing, a substantial portion of his health sacrificed to maintain the merge. The world narrowed to the patch of earth beneath him and the demon beyond the light. Then, with a final, frustrated roar, the demon retreated. It melted back into shadow and molten rock, slipping away into the gathering darkness beyond the farm's borders. The threat was gone, for now. The barrier flickered and began to fade, the energy vines dissolving into motes of light that drifted down to the soil. Leon pulled his hands free, his fingers numb and stained with earth. He tried to stand, but his legs gave way beneath him. He collapsed onto his side, the cool grass pressing against his cheek. His body felt hollowed out, lighter and frilier than ever before. The sacrifice had worked, but at a cost he could feel in every bone. He lay there, breathing shallowly, watching as the last of the barrier's light dissipated. The pumpkin patch was safe, the golem scarecrows lay in ruins, and the rogue demon had fled. But as his vision blurred, the edges of sight turning gray and indistinct, he saw movement on the horizon. Figures emerged from the tree line, not just the coalition returning, but others with them. Reinforcements. Their forms were silhouetted against the twilight sky, approaching with purposeful strides. Leon's eyes drifted shut, his consciousness slipping away. The last thing he saw was the fading glow of the barrier and the advancing shapes, their arrival marking not an end, but another beginning of scrutiny he could no longer deflect. The morning sun bled crimson through the fractured sky, casting long shadows across Leon's ravaged pumpkin patch. He knelt in the soil, his hands trembling as they sifted through the remnants of his golem scarecrows, shattered stone limbs and torn straw scattered like battlefield debris. The air still hummed with the residual energy of last night's desperate defense, a faint golden glow shimmering in the enriched soil where he'd sacrificed his vitality. Every breath felt like drawing glass through his lungs, and a deep, bone-weary ache had settled into his joints, a permanent reminder of the price paid. Leon's fingers brushed against a half-buried dragon-scale pumpkin, its surface still warm to the touch despite the morning chill. He remembered merging those scales with ordinary seeds years ago, thinking only of pest resistance and richer flavor. Now they felt like tombstones marking his failed seclusion. The farm around him told a story of escalating chaos, patches of earth glowing with unnatural energy, trees bent at impossible angles from stray magical discharges, and the lingering scent of ozone and burnt divinity. He didn't hear their arrival so much as feel it, a sudden pressure change in the atmosphere, like the world itself holding its breath. The air grew heavy, thick with power that made the golden soil glow brighter in response. Leon looked up slowly, his movements stiff with exhaustion. They stood at the edge of his field, where the hawthorn bushes had once provided concealment. Now those bushes were withered black, as if the very concept of hiding had been burned away. Valerius stood at the forefront, his celestial armor gleaming with cold, polished light, but he was no longer alone. Flanking him were figures whose presence distorted reality around them, a towering god whose skin shimmered with constellations, a demon lord whose form flickered between solidity and screaming shadow, and half a dozen others whose power signatures made Leon's depleted senses scream in warning. High gods, Leon thought, the realization settling like ice in his stomach. And demon lords. They brought the council. Valerius stepped forward, his boots leaving no imprint in the glowing soil. Leon, he said, and the name carried weight, echoing with layers of meaning. Or should I use the title you abandoned? Synthesis Sage. From behind Valerius, the constellation-skinned god extended a hand. Above his palm, images shimmered into being, not illusions, but memories pulled from the fabric of reality itself. Leon saw his own younger self standing between heaven and hell, hands outstretched as he performed the great merge that ended the war. He saw the aftermath, the false funeral, the carefully constructed legend of the sage's noble sacrifice. Then more recent images, the dragon-scale pumpkins glowing with power, the golem scarecrows patrolling the forest, even the simple roadside stall where Ilara had been healed. Every anomaly traces back here, the demon lord spoke, his voice like grinding stone. The destabilized ley lines. The sentient artifacts appearing across 3 continents. The rogue energies disrupting divine and infernal realms alike. He gestured at the farm. This experiment of yours has consequences beyond your little patch of dirt. Leon pushed himself to his feet, his legs trembling with the effort. He leaned heavily on his hoe, the one merged with a dragon's claw years ago, now feeling like just a tool in his weakened grip. It wasn't an experiment, he said, his voice raspy. It was my home. Home. The constellation god's eyes narrowed. You collapsed the barrier between realms, merged concepts that should never touch, then vanished. The universe spent decades stabilizing from your last solution. Now we find you playing farmer while your creations unravel reality itself. Leon looked at his hands, calloused from honest work, stained with soil, trembling with exhaustion. He remembered the weight of the war, the endless negotiations, the constant pressure of being the one who could fix everything by merging it into something new. The fatigue had been building for centuries, long before he faked his death. You think I wanted this? Leon gestured at the damaged farm. The scarecrows were supposed to keep birds away. The pumpkins were supposed to grow without blight. The soup. He shook his head. I just wanted quiet. I wanted to tend plants that wouldn't die in magical droughts. To brew tea that actually tasted good. Valerius studied him, his expression unreadable. You're weaker than I remember. The report said you performed merges that reshaped landscapes. I'm tired, Leon said, and the admission felt like pulling a thorn from deep in his flesh. The authority, it's gone. Severed. I sacrificed it to make your accord stone. Then I sacrificed my health to protect what little I had left. He looked at the high gods and demon lords. You have evidence. Fine. I am the synthesis sage. I ended your war. I merged heaven and hell when you couldn't stop killing each other. And all I asked in return was to be left alone to grow pumpkins. Silence fell, broken only by the whisper of wind through broken scarecrow limbs. The coalition members exchanged glances, some skeptical, some calculating, a few showing the first flickers of something else. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding of a different kind of exhaustion. Leon closed his eyes, reaching inward. There was no synthesis energy left, that well was dry, the connection severed. But something else remained, buried deeper. The memory of what he'd been. The weight of what he'd done. The desperate, aching need for it to finally be enough. He didn't perform a merge in the traditional sense. There was no energy to channel, no authority to command. Instead, he did something simpler and more terrifying: he opened himself. He took the raw, unvarnished truth of his exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness that had driven him to fake his own death and hide in a magic barren frontier. He combined it with the fragile hope of acceptance, the desperate wish to be seen not as a sage or a threat, but as a man who just wanted to watch things grow. It wasn't a merge of entities. It was a merge of experiences, shared directly through whatever residual connection still existed between beings of power. Leon let them feel the centuries of pressure. The weight of every life saved and every life lost in the war. The crushing responsibility of being the one who could always create a better solution. And beneath it all, the simple, mundane joy of seeing a pumpkin vine thrive. The satisfaction of soil under fingernails. The peace of a quiet morning with no one demanding he fix their problems. The emotional transmission drained what little spiritual energy Leon had left. He swayed, his vision graying at the edges, but he remained standing. Around him, the coalition reacted. The demon lord actually took a step back, his shadow form flickering with unexpected colors. The constellation god stars dimmed momentarily. One of the lesser deities, a goddess of hearths and homes, had tears glistening in her eyes. "You're truly spent," Valerius said slowly, his celestial armor seeming less bright somehow. The legends never mentioned exhaustion. Only power. Legends rarely do, Leon whispered. Debate erupted then, but it was different than before. Less accusation, more discussion. The demon lord argued that power couldn't be abandoned, it was a responsibility. The constellation god countered that forcing responsibility on someone incapable of bearing it was how tyrants were made. The hearth goddess suggested perhaps some creations needed tending rather than destruction. Voices overlapped, positions shifted, and for a moment, it seemed like something might actually change. Then the ground shook. It started as a low rumble, deep beneath the soil. The golden glow in the earth pulsed, then brightened to blinding intensity. The shattered golem scarecrow fragments began vibrating, skittering across the ground like dropped coins. Leon's dragon-scale pumpkins glowed with internal fire, their surfaces cracking with light. "What is this?" the demon lord demanded, shadows coalescing into defensive formations. Valerius looked at Leon, genuine concern in his eyes for the first time. "You didn't know?" Before Leon could answer, the ground heaved. Not in one place, but across the entire farm, the pumpkin patch, the herb garden, even the simple wooden cabin. Deep fissures opened in the soil, and from them poured not dirt or rock, but primordial energy so ancient it predated concepts like God or demon. It was the color of time itself, shifting through hues that had no names, and it carried a presence. A consciousness. Ancient. Hungry. And waking from slumber measured in epochs. The coalition's debate died instantly, replaced by unified alarm. Weapons and powers manifested in a dozen different forms as gods and demons alike faced not each other, but the ground beneath them. The shaking intensified, becoming rhythmic, purposeful, the heartbeat of something that shouldn't exist. Leon stared at the fissures spreading through his farm, at the primordial energy seeping into the air. He thought of all his merges, the dragon claws with tools, the elemental cores with seeds, the vitality with soil. He thought of how synthesis didn't just combine things, but awaken potential. And he realized, with dawning horror, what he'd been cultivating above. Not just pumpkins. Not just a farm. But an alarm clock for something that had been sleeping since before the first star ignited. The ground split open directly before him, and from the depths rose not a creature, but an eye, a single, massive eye composed of swirling primordial energy, fixing its gaze on the gathered powers. And in that gaze was recognition. And hunger. And the unmistakable message that breakfast had arrived. The ground heaved like a living beast in its death throes. Cracks spiderwebbed through Leon's pumpkin patch, glowing with an inner light that pulsed in time with the earth's violent heartbeat. Soil rich with residual synthesis energy churned and boiled, throwing up geysers of dirt that rained down as glittering dust. From the epicenter, a form began to rise, not crawling, but unfolding from the very land itself. Leon stumbled back, his frail body protesting every movement. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one tasting of ozone and ancient stone. The entity wasn't just emerging, it was assembling itself from the farm's components. Glowing pumpkin vines wrapped around chunks of upturned soil, weaving together with fragments of the destroyed golem scarecrows. Dragon-scale pumpkins shattered, their crystalline flesh merging with the elemental cores Leon had buried seasons ago. The result was a titan of mismatched parts, a torso of packed earth veined with phoenix ember roots, limbs of animated stone and enchanted wood, a head that was half-shattered scarecrow face and half-glowing elemental core. "It's feeding on the residual energy," Valerius shouted over the growing roar. The former celestial archon stood with his coalition, gods and demons alike forming a loose circle around the awakening horror. "Your synthesis left echoes in the soil, and they've coalesced into this amalgamation." Leon's mind raced even as his body trembled. He remembered every merge, the dragon scale with the pumpkin seeds, the golems with the scarecrows, the vitality he'd sacrificed to create the barrier. Each act had left traces, like footprints in wet clay. And now something had followed those footprints home. The Titan's first movement was a shudder that sent tremors through the entire frontier. Trees at the forest's edge swayed violently, their roots tearing free of the ground. The coalition members braced themselves, divine light and infernal shadows flaring in defensive patterns. One of the demon lords, a being of shifting obsidian and molten rock, extended claws that gleamed with captured starlight. "We contain it here," Valerius commanded. "If it reaches populated lands." He didn't need to finish. Leon could see it in the way the Titan's gaze swept across the farm, hungry and directionless. This wasn't a thinking creature, it was instinct given form, drawn to synthesis energy like a moth to flame. And Leon's farm was the brightest flame on the continent. The Titan took its first proper step. The ground cratered beneath a foot made of fused dragon scale and enchanted soil. Pumpkin vines whipped from its limbs, lashing out at the nearest coalition members. A minor goddess of winds threw up a barrier of compressed air, but the vines punched through, wrapping around her ethereal form. She screamed as synthesis energy, raw and uncontrolled, began dissolving her divine essence. "It's consuming magic," someone shouted. Leon's hands clenched into fists. His fingers felt brittle, like dried twigs. The spiritual depletion from his emotional transmission to the coalition left him hollow, a vessel with cracks where power should flow. But he still had his mind. He still remembered the principles. "It wants to merge," Leon said, the realization dawning even as the words left his lips. "It's not attacking, it's trying to absorb everything." Valerius shot him a sharp look. "Explain." "The residual energy in my soil, it's all from merges. The Titan is acting on that impulse. To combine. To synthesize." Leon's voice grew stronger despite his weakness. "We can't fight it with force. We have to give it what it wants, but redirect the impulse." Another coalition member fell as the Titan's vine tendrils wrapped around a demon of shadow. The demon thrashed, its form flickering as synthesis energy pulsed through it. The Titan wasn't killing them, it was trying to incorporate them, to add their essence to its growing form. "What do you propose?" Valerius demanded, parrying a vine with a blade of solidified light. Leon's eyes scanned the Titan, noting how its components shifted and realigned. The scarecrow face twitched, its painted eyes rolling wildly. The elemental core at its chest pulsed in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Like a heartbeat. "Like. It's dreaming," Leon whispered. Then louder, "It's not awake. Not fully. The energy woke it, but it's still mostly asleep. We need to deepen that sleep." "How?" This from Ceres, the minor harvest goddess who had manifested earlier. Her wheat gold hair was tangled with dirt, her divine presence flickering with exhaustion. Leon met Valerius's eyes. "A merge. But not with my power alone." He gestured to the coalition. "You all have energy, divine, infernal, celestial. Combined with the residual synthesis echoes in my soil, we could create something that speaks its language." Valerius hesitated for only a heartbeat. The Titan was growing larger with each consumed fragment of magic, its form becoming more coherent, more dangerous. Already it stood 3 times the height of Leon's farmhouse, and it showed no signs of stopping. "What concepts?" Valerius asked. "Rest," Leon said immediately. "And slumber. Not just sleep, the deep, dreamless kind. The kind that lasts. You want us to combine our energies with your soil's echoes to create a lullaby for a continent-shaking entity?" "Yes." Another demon fell to the vines. The Titan's form shuddered, absorbing the infernal energy and growing darker, more solid. Time was running out. Valerius nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Do it." Leon dropped to his knees, ignoring the protest of his bones. His palms pressed against the churned soil. The residual energy there responded to his touch, not with power, but with memory. He could feel every merge he'd ever performed on this land, every synthesis that had made his farm both sanctuary and catastrophe. Channel your energy into the soil, Leon instructed without looking up. Not at the Titan. Into the ground. Let it flow through the echoes. The coalition hesitated. Gods and demons, ancient enemies, looked at each other across centuries of warfare. Then Valerius placed his hand on the earth, his celestial light seeping into the soil. One by one, others followed. A demon lord with skin of cooled lava. A goddess of twilight. A celestial being whose form was made of harmonizing notes. Their energies mixed in the soil, not merging, not yet, but coexisting in the medium Leon had prepared through years of unintended synthesis. Leon closed his eyes. He had no active power left, but he still had the knowledge. The understanding of how things combined. He focused on the concepts: rest. Not just cessation of movement, but peace, stillness, the end of striving. And slumber. The cousin of rest, but deeper, more profound, the surrender of consciousness, the embrace of darkness between stars. In the soil, the coalition's energies began to resonate with the synthesis echoes. Leon didn't force them together, he simply provided the pattern, the template he'd used 1,000 times with hoe and seed and tool. The energies recognized it. They began to weave themselves together, following the paths Leon's merges had carved into the very essence of this place. The Titan paused. Its vine tendrils, which had been reaching for more victims, went still. The scarecrow face tilted, painted eyes focusing on the ground where energies pooled and combined. It took a step toward them, not threateningly, but curiously. Like a child drawn to a familiar song. "It's working," Ceres breathed. "Don't stop," Leon gritted out. Sweat beaded on his forehead, cold and clammy. The effort of guiding the merge without active power was like trying to paint with phantom limbs. He could see what needed to happen, but he had to rely on the coalition to provide the brushstrokes. The combined energies in the soil began to take shape. Not a physical form, but a pattern, a resonance that pulsed through the ground and air. It was a lullaby made not of sound, but of concept. Rest woven with slumber, threaded through with the coalition's diverse magics and Leon's synthesis echoes. The Titan knelt. The movement was surprisingly gentle for such a massive creature. Its vine tendrils retracted, curling around its own form. The elemental core at its chest pulsed slower, dimmer. The scarecrow face's painted eyes drooped. "More," Leon whispered. "It needs to be complete. A full cycle." Valerius's hand trembled on the ground. Celestial light streamed from him in ribbons of silver and gold. "I can feel it, taking something." "It's the cost," Leon said, his voice barely audible over the fading rumble of the earth. "Every merge has a price. This one, it's taking a share of your power. Permanently." No one pulled back. The Titan was settling now, its form beginning to dissolve at the edges. Glowing pumpkin vines unwound from its torso, returning to the soil. Dragon-scale fragments fell away like shedding skin. The entity wasn't being destroyed, it was unraveling, its components returning to their sources, its consciousness retreating into the deep earth where it had slept for eons. Finally, with a sigh that sounded like wine through ancient caverns, the Titan lay down. Its form collapsed in on itself, not with violence, but with the relief of a burden laid down. The soil swallowed it, the ground sealing over as if the entity had never emerged. Only a slight mound remained, covered in ordinary grass and dotted with wildflowers that hadn't been there moments before. Silence fell over the farm. Leon slumped forward, catching himself on trembling arms. The effort had drained what little vitality he had left. Around him, the coalition members rose unsteadily. Their auras were dimmer, their divine and infernal presences diminished. Valerius's celestial light, once blinding, now glowed with the softness of moonlight through clouds. "It's done," Valerius said, his voice hoarse. Leon pushed himself to sitting, his back against the mound that marked the Titan's resting place. "For now. You knew the cost. I guessed." Leon met his eyes. "Every merge takes something. This one took from all of us." Ceres approached, her steps careful on the churned soil. "My connection to the harvest, it's weaker. Like part of my domain was integrated into that sleep." It was, Leon confirmed. The concepts needed anchors. Real things to give them weight. Rest needed the peace after labor. Slumber needed the darkness between growing seasons. He gestured weakly at the farm. Your domains provided those anchors. The demon lord of obsidian and molten rock growled, a sound like grinding stones. We have lost power. Permanently. And gained peace, Valerius countered. He looked at Leon, his expression unreadable. You could have let it consume us. The Titan would have grown powerful enough to challenge even the highest gods. Instead, you used our own energies to put it back to sleep. It was the only way that didn't end with everything destroyed. Leon's gaze swept over his farm, the damaged pumpkin patch, the shattered remnants of his golem scarecrows, the churned soil that held so many secrets. This place, it's not just a farm anymore. It's become a nexus. A focal point. Valerius nodded slowly. Which brings us to our next problem. He helped Leon to his feet, the gesture surprisingly gentle for a being of such power. The coalition cannot ignore what happened here today. But we also cannot afford to lose you, or make you an enemy. Leon waited, his heart pounding a weak rhythm against his ribs. We offer a deal, Valerius said. You remain here. Tend your farm. Live your quiet life. He paused, his diminished light flickering. But you become a hidden guardian. When anomalies like this arise, when synthesis energy or ancient entities threaten the balance, you will be called upon. Not as a soldier. Not as the synthesis sage. But as a consultant. Someone who understands how to merge things without destroying everything. And in exchange? Leon asked, though he already knew the answer. We leave you alone. No more investigations. No more confrontations. Your legend remains dead, your retirement respected. Valerius's eyes held Leon's. But you must remain on call. For crises only. When the balance is truly threatened. Leon looked at his hands, thin, frail, marked with the calluses of farming rather than the scars of war. He thought of his pumpkins, his tea, the simple rhythm of seasons he'd fought so hard to claim. Then he thought of the Titan, of what might have happened if it had reached beyond his farm. How would you call me? He asked quietly. Valerius produced a small, smooth stone from within his robes. It was plain gray, unremarkable except for a faint warmth that radiated from it. This is linked to the accord stone you created. When it grows hot, when it glows, that means your consultation is needed. Leon took the stone. It fit perfectly in his palm, weighty with promise and burden both. Do we have an accord? Valerius asked. Around them, the coalition waited. Gods and demons, their power diminished but their attention unwavering. The farm lay quiet in the aftermath, the only sound the whisper of wind through damaged crops. Leon closed his fingers around the stone. Its warmth seeped into his skin, a constant reminder of the line he now walked, between the peace he craved and the responsibility he couldn't escape. We do, he said. And as the words left his lips, he felt the weight settle on him, not the crushing burden of his old legend, but the lighter, more persistent weight of a promise made. The quiet farm life would continue. But it would never again be just about pumpkins and tea. The morning after the accord was struck, Leon stood at the edge of his pumpkin patch, the warm stone from Valerius resting in his palm like a sleeping ember. The farm felt different, not in any visible way, but in the subtle hum that now permeated the air. A divine ward, woven from the coalition's combined energies, had settled over the land overnight. It wasn't a barrier that shimmered or glowed, rather, it was a quiet presence that made the sunlight seem gentler, the breeze more deliberate, as if the very atmosphere had been calibrated to a finer tolerance. Leon's body ached with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The vitality sacrifice from the demon attack had left him frail, and the spiritual depletion from the emotional merge with the coalition had hollowed him out further. He moved slowly, each step a conscious effort, his hands trembling slightly as he knelt to examine the soil. The earth still held traces of the temporary barrier he'd created, a faint, golden shimmer that danced at the edges of perception when he squinted. It was residual energy, left behind like footprints in wet clay, and it mingled with the synthesis echoes from the Titan's slumber. The grassy mound where the ancient entity now slept rose gently near the western fence, covered in dew-kissed clover that seemed to pulse with a slow, rhythmic light. He spent the morning tending to his recovering crops. The pumpkin vines, once enhanced with dragon scales, had been damaged in the attacks, their leaves torn and stems bruised. The tea plants, a blend of mountain herbs merged with celestial dew, were wilting, their silver-edged leaves drooping as if in mourning. Leon's inventory was sparse now, the seeds merged with phoenix embers lay dormant in their clay pots, their glowing elemental sprouts reduced to faint sparks, and the animated golem scarecrow guardian was nothing but scattered fragments of enchanted wood and stone. He gathered what remained, his thoughts drifting to the simplicity he'd once craved. This farm was supposed to be his sanctuary, a place where the only miracles were perfect pumpkins and divine tea. Instead, it had become a nexus of power, a quiet epicenter that kept reshaping the continent with every simple solution he crafted. By midday, the sun hung high, casting long shadows from the hawthorn bushes where, weeks ago, a Holy Kingdom spy had watched him. Leon wondered if more eyes were out there now, gods, demons, nobles, all bound by the accord to leave him be, yet curiosity was a difficult leash to hold. He moved to his roadside stall, a humble wooden structure with a thatched roof, and began preparing for what passed as normalcy. The stall had always been his front, a place to sell produce and maintain the illusion of a simple farmer. Today, it felt like a stage, and he was an actor who'd forgotten his lines. The conflict arose not from external threats, but from within. His pumpkins and tea were failing, and without them, his quiet life would wither. He needed to restore them, but using his ultimate synthesis authority, carelessly could trigger another upheaval. The coalition had warned him, any major merge might alert the higher powers again. Leon sat on a weathered stool, the warm stone in his pocket a constant reminder of his new role as hidden guardian. He closed his eyes, feeling the residual energy in the soil, a tapestry of his past merges, the coalition's power shares, and the Titan's slumbering essence. It was gentle, subdued, like embers after a fire. He realized he didn't need to force a merge, he could coax one, using what was already there. In the late afternoon, with the sky painted in hues of orange and purple, Leon decided to act. He didn't summon grand gestures or chant incantations. Instead, he walked to the center of the pumpkin patch, where the soil was richest, and placed his hands flat on the ground. The ultimate synthesis authority wasn't an active skill he could wield, it was part of his being, a fundamental law he could nudge. He focused on two concepts, growth, the natural, patient unfolding of life, and harmony, the balance that had eluded him since his retirement. In his mind, he didn't merge them as separate entities, he let them intertwine, like vines seeking sunlight, using the residual energy as a catalyst. The merge was subtle, almost imperceptible. A soft, green light spread from his palms, seeping into the earth without sound or spectacle. It wasn't the explosive creation of god-tier artifacts, it was a whisper, a sigh of renewal. The pumpkin vines responded first, their bruises fading, their leaves unfurling with a vibrant, deep green that seemed to drink the light. Tiny blossoms appeared, their petals edged in gold, and the air filled with a sweet, earthy scent. The tea plants perked up, their silver leaves regaining luster, and a faint mist rose from them, carrying notes of jasmine and starlight. Leon felt a warmth spread through his own body, not a surge of power, but a gentle restoration. Some of his lost vitality returned, easing the ache in his bones, though he remained weary. The merge had used what was already present, recycling energy rather than drawing new forces, and it left the farm in a state of quiet abundance. By evening, the pumpkins had grown to a size that bordered on legendary, each one large enough to fill a cart, their skins a mosaic of orange and emerald, with patterns that seemed to shift in the fading light. The tea leaves, now harvested, glimmered in their baskets, promising brews that could soothe souls or sharpen minds. Leon placed them on his stall, labeling them simply as Frontier Pumpkins and Harmony Tea. He knew they were more than that, they were artifacts of a new equilibrium, born from collaboration rather than conflict. He sold them discreetly, to travelers passing by on the dusty road, accepting copper coins without haggle. Each sale felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of the mundane. The cliffhanger came as the last light of day dipped below the horizon. A customer approached, a child, no more than 8 years old, with dusty clothes and eyes wide with wonder. She pointed at a pumpkin, her voice timid. "Mister, is that magic?" Leon smiled, a genuine expression that softened the lines of exhaustion on his face. He handed her a small slice, its flesh glowing faintly. "Just a good harvest," he said. As she ate, her eyes lit up with a joy so pure it struck a chord in Leon's memory. He saw echoes of his past, of a time before wars and mergers, when creation was about wonder, not power. In that moment, he knew his quiet life was forever changed, the accord, the ward, the legendary produce, they were threads in a new tapestry. But as the child skipped away, clutching her pumpkin slice, Leon felt a certainty settle in his chest. This farm, this stall, this simple act of growing and sharing, it was still his own. Distant rumors, carried on the wind, spoke of a gardener god rising in the frontier, but for now, there was only the rustle of leaves and the promise of tomorrow's tea.